The stagecoach smelled like sweat, leather, and something dead that nobody had bothered to identify. Lena Mercer had been riding inside it for 11 hours, wedged between a snoring cattle merchant and a wooden crate labeled fragile, glass instruments that had been anything but protected from the ruts and rocks of the frontier trail. Her back ached. Her mouth tasted like trail dust. The small travel case sitting across her knees had been repacked 3 times since morning, because every hard lurch of the coach sent its contents sliding, and she couldn't afford to let the single glass jar inside shatter. That jar held her mother's rose preserve, the last thing her mother had ever made before the fever took her. Lena wasn't superstitious. She wasn't sentimental in any way that made her soft. But she held that case steady through every rut and every jolt and every hard downhill grade, because some things you just don't let break. Outside the cracked window, the land changed. She'd grown up in the Eastern Territories, in a town with a church, a school, a post office, and neighbors who knew each other's names. The land there was green and patient, rivers moving slow through fields, trees thick enough to give real shade. Out here, the country had no patience for anything. It was red rock and yellow dirt and sky, so enormous it seemed almost aggressive, like the land was daring you to stay. Scrub brush clung to the hillsides. Dried creek beds cut white lines across the earth. And somewhere ahead, half hidden in the shimmering heat, the cluster of buildings that made up Hollow Creek waited like a fist half raised. Lena had read about it in a letter. Hollow Creek is a working town, Garrick Thorne had written in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper. Not a gentle one. I need a capable woman, not a decorative one. I have land and a house and the means to provide. I don't have time for pretense. She'd read that letter 8 times. Not because it was romantic, it wasn't, not even close, but because it was honest, and in her experience, honest was rare enough to be worth paying attention to. She had answered it, and now here she was. The coach groaned to a stop. The driver called out from above, "Hollow Creek! Everybody off that's getting off!" The cattle merchant woke with a snort and immediately started gathering his things. The glass crate remained miraculously intact. Lena tucked the travel case under her arm, straightened what was left of her dignity, and climbed out into the afternoon sun. The first thing she felt was heat, dry, immediate, and merciless. The second thing she felt was eyes. Hollow Creek's main street was wide enough for 3 wagons to pass each other and packed with exactly the kind of people you'd expect in a frontier town on a Wednesday afternoon. Ranchers, laborers, merchants, a few women moving quickly with their eyes down. A group of men loitering outside a saloon who had nowhere better to be and no intention of finding anywhere. Lena stood beside the coach and looked at the town, and the town looked back. She was 26 years old, of middling height, with dark hair already coming loose from its pins after a day of travel. Her dress was clean but not new. Her boots were practical. She had the kind of face that people sometimes called plain until she was looking directly at you, and then something in her eyes made them revise their opinion without fully understanding why. She was not what anyone would call striking, but she held herself like she was. That more than anything seemed to bother people. "That the letter bride?" someone said. Not quietly. She turned toward the voice. It belonged to a man leaning against the front post of the general store. Heavy-set, sunburned, wearing a hat with a sweat-stained brim. He was talking to the man beside him, but watching her openly, the way you'd watch a horse being walked out of a trailer. Assessing. Dismissive. "Must be," the second man said. "Garrick's been waiting on one for 2 seasons. Waiting on a purchase, you mean?" The first man laughed. The second man joined him. Neither of them lowered their voices. Lena turned away. She picked up her case. She walked to the edge of the boardwalk and looked for a livery, a post office, somewhere to send word that she'd arrived. Garrick's letter had said he'd meet her at the coach, but there was no sign of him. No one who looked like a rancher expecting a bride. No one holding a sign with her name. Just heat, strangers, and the quiet, comfortable cruelty of people who'd already decided what she was. "Excuse me," she said to a woman passing nearby, a shopkeeper by the look of her apron. "Could you tell me where I might send a message to Thorn Ridge Ranch?" The woman slowed, looked at Lena, looked at the travel case, made the same calculation everyone else had already made. "Post office is down the street," she said. Then, "You're the male bride." It wasn't a question. "I'm Lena Mercer," Lena said. "I'm arriving to meet Garrick Thorne." The woman's expression didn't warm. "Well, he's not here. Wouldn't be in town on a Wednesday." She paused. "You could try waiting at the hotel, if you've got money for it." I have money, Lena said. The woman seemed mildly surprised. Hotel's at the end of the street. She walked away without another word. Lena stood there for a moment, looking at the end of the street. Then she started walking. She made it maybe 30 feet before things got worse. The group of men outside the saloon hadn't moved, but their attention had shifted. 3 of them were watching her now. The kind of watching that wasn't curiosity so much as appetite. The kind that had nothing to do with who you were and everything to do with what they thought they were owed. Hey there, one of them called out. Lena didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't look. Hey, let her girl. She kept walking. She heard boots on the boardwalk behind her. Not running, just the lazy confidence of men who don't expect to be ignored. And then a hand closed around her arm and spun her around. The man who grabbed her was young, maybe 22, with a lean face and eyes that had something brittle and mean in them, like glass that had cracked without shattering all the way. He smelled like cheap whiskey and something else. Tobacco, maybe. Or just the general smell of someone who'd been outdoors too long without bathing. I'm talking to you, he said. I heard you, Lena said. Her voice came out level. That surprised even her. Let go of my arm. Where are you headed so fast? Garrick's not even in town. He grinned. His friends watched from the boardwalk, already grinning in anticipation. Maybe you ought to wait with us. We're friendlier than a hotel room. Let go of my arm, she said again, lower, slower. He didn't. What happened next happened quickly. He gave her arm a sharp pull, the kind meant to throw her off balance, to make her stumble and feel small. And Lena stumbled, and the travel case swung hard, and her elbow caught the corner of a hitching post, and she went down hard onto one knee in the dirt. The case flew open. The glass jar of rose preserve rolled out and hit the packed earth and cracked. Not shattered, but cracked. A single ugly fracture running up the side. Lena looked at it. The man laughed. His friends laughed. Someone farther down the boardwalk made a sound like a suppressed chuckle and didn't try very hard to suppress it. She didn't move for a moment. Not because she was too shaken to move, because if she moved right then, she wasn't sure what she would do. And she was in a strange town with no allies and no ground to stand on. And she was smart enough to know when the odds were catastrophic. So she stayed on one knee in the dirt, picked up the cracked jar carefully, and held it. Look at that, the young man said, crouching down to her level with the particular cruelty of someone who enjoys the view from above. Bet that's all you brought with you, a cracked jar and a hope. I brought more than that, Lena said quietly. Yeah? He tilted his head. What else you got? She looked at him directly. Patience, she said, and a longer memory than you're accounting for. He stared at her for a second and something flickered in his expression. Not respect, not yet. Nothing that refined. But something like the first flicker of unease in a man who'd underestimated what he was dealing with. Then someone else moved. Lena heard the man before she saw him. She heard boots, not the careless, swaggering step of the men behind her, but something measured and deliberate, the step of a man who already knew exactly where he was putting his foot before he lifted the other one. She heard the crowd go quiet, and then a hand closed around the collar of the young man crouching in front of her, and the young man was lifted, genuinely lifted, feet briefly clearing the ground, and thrown sideways into the hitching post with a crack that sent the horses tied to it stepping back in alarm. The man who'd done it stood between Lena and the rest of them. He was not what she'd expected. She had imagined, reading his letters, a man of a certain type, thick, older, the kind of rough frontier wealth that wears itself on the outside in calluses and silver belt buckles. She'd imagined someone who would arrive looking like a transaction completed. Garrick Thorne was tall, lean in the way that comes from work rather than deprivation. His hair was dark and starting to go gray at the temples in a way that looked less distinguished than it did worn down, like the color was being bleached out by something more than age. He had a face that had been hit before and healed with minor misalignment, the nose slightly off-center, a small ridge of scar tissue along the left jawline. He was not handsome in any comfortable sense of the word, but he stood like a man who had never in his life needed to make himself larger to be taken seriously, and that was its own kind of presence. The young man had gotten to his knees, hand going to the back of his head where it had met the post. His friends on the boardwalk were very still. Garrick Thorne didn't even look at them. He looked at Lena. You're hurt, he said. It came out flat. Not cold exactly, but stripped of anything soft. An observation, not a question. I'm on my knee in the dirt, she said. It's not the same thing. Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't have said what. He reached down and offered his hand, the same kind of hand that had just thrown a man into a post, now extended to pull her up from the ground. She looked at it for half a second. Then she took it. He pulled her up easily. She found her footing, brushed the dust from her knee with one hand, and kept hold of the cracked jar with the other. Then he turned toward the young man, who had gotten to his feet and was standing with the particular expression of someone calculating whether the situation had left him enough dignity to work with. His friends on the boardwalk were recalculating their own positions rapidly. I know your father, Garrick said to the young man. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. That was somehow worse than shouting. I'll be talking to him this week about the fence line on his north quarter. I expect I'll have something else to mention as well. The young man's face went through several stages. She's nobody, he said. It came out smaller than he'd intended. She came for me, Garrick said. The quiet didn't waver. Anyone who lays hands on her again answers to me. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Then Garrick turned back to Lena, and the matter was apparently finished, because he didn't look at the young man again. Didn't need to. And somewhere in that complete, unbothered dismissal was something more effective than anything else he could have done. Your case, he said. I have it, she said. A pause. The hotel's at the end of the street, he said. I'll have a room arranged. I wasn't... He stopped. Looked at something in the middle distance for a moment. I wasn't expecting the coach to arrive early. It was on time, she said. Then I was late, he said. It was not an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and from the way he said it, carefully, like the words had cost something, she suspected acknowledgement didn't come easily to him. Garrick Thorne, he said. He didn't extend his hand this time, just his name, offered plainly. Lena Mercer, she said. They stood in the middle of Hollow Creek's main street with dust settling around them and the eyes of half the town on their backs, looking at each other for the first time. She didn't know what she'd expected. She didn't know what he'd expected either. Whatever it was, neither of them looked particularly satisfied, but neither of them looked like they were leaving. The hotel room was small. That was fine. Lena had lived in smaller. What she hadn't lived in was a room where the floor tilted very slightly toward the left wall, where the window had been painted shut so thoroughly that no amount of effort would open it, and where the bed had a mattress that felt like it contained the fossilized remains of previous guests. The wash basin worked. The water was cold. The towel was clean. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the cracked jar of rose preserve in both hands and looked at the fracture running through the glass. It hadn't leaked. The seal was still intact. The crack was structural but not catastrophic. It would hold if she was careful with it, for a while longer at least. You hold together what you can for as long as you can. That had been her mother's philosophy, applied to everything from mended clothing to difficult relationships to cracked jars. It had served Lena imperfectly and not always well, but it was the only philosophy she had. She put the jar back in the case, lay back on the terrible mattress, stared at the ceiling. She was 26 years old. She had $63, a cracked jar, a few changes of practical clothing, and a marriage letter from a man she'd just met for the first time. She had no family left, no other prospects she'd been willing to take. She had turned down 2 other letters before Garrick's, one from a farmer who'd seemed too eager in a way that made her skin crawl, one from a merchant who'd described his expectations for a wife in language that made her feel like a piece of furniture being ordered from a catalog. Garrick Thorne's letter had been different, not warmer, not more romantic, just different. I'm not writing to sell you something, he'd written in that hard-pressing hand. I'm writing because I need someone who can survive here. This is difficult country, and I have difficult work, and I don't have space for pretense or delicate dispositions. If you're reading this looking for reassurance that frontier life is manageable and that I'm a gentleman, I'd encourage you to answer a different letter. If you're reading this because you're capable and tired of the limitations placed on capable women in settled territory, then perhaps we have something to discuss. She'd read that and felt something specific, something between recognition and relief. And she'd written back. 3 letters total, across 2 months. Then she'd agreed to come. She stared at the ceiling. Perhaps we have something to discuss. She hoped that was still true. He knocked at 7 in the evening. She'd changed into her second dress. Also practical, also not new, but presentable. and pinned her hair more successfully than the morning's attempt. When she opened the door, he was standing in the hall holding his hat in both hands, which seemed like it might be the closest thing to nervousness she was going to get from him. "I thought we might talk," he said, "before tomorrow, if you're not too tired." "I'm tired," she said, "but I'd rather talk." He nodded once. "There's a dining room downstairs." The dining room was half full, some cowboys eating quietly, a family with two small children who were being ineffectively shushed, a woman in the corner who was either a merchant or a widow by her clothing. Everyone looked at Garrick and Lena when they came in. Everyone looked away when Garrick sat down. He ordered coffee for both of them without asking her. She almost said something, then decided that particular battle could wait. "The ranch is 12 miles out," he said, when the coffee had come and the waitress had retreated. "We'd leave tomorrow morning. The preacher's out there. Reverend Mills. He comes through our area on Thursdays. We can arrange the ceremony before we head back." "Tomorrow," she said, "if that's agreeable to you." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. "You said in your letter," she said, "that you don't have space for pretense." "That's right. So tell me something true," she said, "something that didn't make it into the letters." He looked up then. She had the impression that direct questions were not something he encountered regularly, and possibly not something he enjoyed. But he didn't look away. "I have debts," he said. "What kind?" "The kind a man doesn't advertise." His jaw tightened slightly. "Not money debts. Older than that." "People you've wronged?" she said, the tightening again. "People I used to run with," he said, "before the ranch, before I stopped being the kind of man I don't much like looking back at." He paused. "I've been honest in my life for 8 years now, but the past has a way of deciding it's not finished with you on its own schedule." Lena held her coffee cup. "Are these people dangerous?" "They have been," he said. "I don't know if they'll come looking. Most of the time I think they won't. Sometimes I think differently." He looked at her steadily. "You should know that before the ceremony. You should know what you're stepping into." The table was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. "It doesn't concern you?" "It concerns me," she said. "That's not the same thing as changing my decision." She looked at him. "I grew up in a house where we didn't discuss real things, where my father pretended everything was fine until it catastrophically wasn't, and by then there was no preparing for any of it. I have always found honesty more useful than comfort." Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but something that had been braced against expectation relaxed very slightly. "What about you?" he said. It came out differently than the question he'd been asked, more careful, less practiced. "What about me? Is there something I should know, before tomorrow?" She thought about it. "I'm not easy to live with," she said. "I have opinions, and I express them. I don't take well to being told what I can and can't do in a space I'm supposed to share. I'm not sentimental, but I'm not cold either, and I don't always know how to explain the difference." She paused. "I have never been afraid of hard work. I have never pretended to be less capable than I am to make someone else more comfortable, and I will not start." He listened to all of this with the particular stillness of someone giving it actual weight. "I don't need you to be less capable," he said. "Then we may do all right," she said. A pause. "I'm not an easy man," he said, in case that wasn't clear. It was perfectly clear, she said. "I'm not easy either. Maybe that's fine." He almost smiled. She couldn't be entirely certain. It was very small and very brief, but she thought it was close. "Finish your coffee," he said. "Tomorrow's an early start." The ceremony took place the next morning behind the small whitewashed building where Reverend Mills stopped once a week to see to the spiritual needs of the scattered ranch families in the area. There was no crowd. There was no music. There was Reverend Mills, a small dry man with a kind face and the slightly distracted air of someone running behind schedule. There was the rancher's foreman, a man named Cobb, gray-bearded and silent, who served as the required witness. There was Garrick, in his cleanest shirt, which was still not particularly clean, and there was Lena, in the dress she'd arrived in, because it was the better of the two. The vows took 8 minutes. They were the traditional words, worn smooth by repetition into something that meant less than it might have if delivered with any urgency. Garrick said them in the same flat, careful voice he seemed to use for everything. Not dismissive, just stripped of performance. When the moment came to place the ring on her finger, he reached into his shirt pocket and produced a simple band of silver, which he slid onto her hand with the focused attention of a man completing a task he wanted to do correctly. She said her vows and meant the essential parts of them. She couldn't have said whether he did the same. His face gave very little away. Reverend Mills pronounced them married. Cobb shook Garrick's hand and nodded at Lena in a way that was respectful, she thought, or at least not unfriendly. Mills offered them both his best wishes and then excused himself, because he had 3 other stops to make before dark. And that was it. They rode back to Thorn Ridge Ranch in a wagon with Cobb driving, Garrick sitting beside her on the bench, and the 2 of them not speaking for most of the 12 miles. It wasn't hostile silence. It was just silence, the honest kind, between 2 people who hadn't yet figured out what to say to each other and didn't see the point of filling the space with noise for its own sake. At some point, about 7 miles out, he said, "It's different from what you imagined." "Most things are," she said. He nodded. At another point, about 3 miles out, she said, "What happened to your nose?" He touched it without thinking. "Horse," he said, "years ago." "It healed badly." "Yes." "You should have had it set properly." "There wasn't a doctor available." "Was there one unavailable?" He turned to look at her. "What?" "Sometimes when there isn't a doctor available," she said, "it means the person didn't bother to find one." A pause. "I didn't bother to find one," he admitted. "Why?" He seemed to consider this longer than the question required. "I suppose I thought it didn't matter." She turned to look out at the land ahead of them, the red rock, the vast sky, the ranch coming into view on the low ridge ahead. "Things like that tend to matter later," she said, "even when they don't seem to at the time." He didn't answer, but she had the feeling he was thinking about it. Thorn Ridge Ranch was not beautiful. She hadn't expected beautiful. But there was a difference between not beautiful and what she found when the wagon rolled through the gate, a main house that was solid and square and entirely without comfort beyond the structural, surrounded by working buildings in various states of repair, a fence line that stretched out in both directions with the practical geometry of function rather than aesthetics, and a yard that existed entirely for work and not for anything else. There were 2 ranch hands already at work near the barn when they arrived, young men who looked up and then looked away with the careful neutrality of employees who'd learned to read the boss's moods. The house inside was worse than the outside, which was impressive, not dirty. Garrick Thorne kept an ordered household. She could see that. Things had their places, nothing was piled carelessly, the floors were swept. But there was nothing on the walls, no curtains. The furniture was functional and severe. The kitchen had what it needed and not a single item beyond that. It was the house of a man who had made himself stop wanting things. She stood in the center of the front room and looked around at all of it, and Garrick stood near the door watching her look at it, and after a moment she said, "Which room is mine?" "Yours," he repeated. "I'll need my own room," she said. She said it plainly, without apology. "I assumed that was understood." "It's understood," he said, after only a half-second's pause. Whatever he'd expected, he'd adjusted to this without visible drama. "Far end of the hall, it's small. That's fine." She picked up her case and walked down the hall to find it. The room was small, but it had a window. A real window, one that opened, facing west, which meant afternoon light and a view of the ridge. She put her case on the floor and opened the window and let the air come in, hot and dry, and carrying the smell of cattle and sage. And something else she couldn't name, something mineral and old that was just the smell of that specific piece of country. She put the cracked jar on the windowsill where the light would come through it. In the light, the rose preserve was a deep, dark red, almost burgundy, almost the color of old blood, which was probably not what her mother had intended to leave her. But the light came through it, and the fracture in the glass caught the light and scattered it, and the overall effect was unexpectedly warm. She thought, "I can work with this." She meant the room, she meant the house, she meant the marriage and the man and the 12 miles of difficult country between her and the nearest town. She meant all of it. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at the cracked jar glowing in the afternoon light. And she didn't think about what she'd left behind or what she'd arrived into, because that kind of thinking was a trap she'd learned to avoid young. She thought about what was in front of her, and then she unpacked her case. The ranch ran on a schedule that didn't care what day of the week it was. Lena woke on her first morning at Thorn Ridge at 5 in the morning because the sounds of a working ranch at that hour were impossible to sleep through. Horses, cattle, voices, the machinery of a world that needed tending whether you were ready or not. She dressed without lighting a lamp, went to the kitchen, Found coffee already made and Garrick already gone. She poured herself a cup and went outside. The sky in the east was doing something extraordinary. Layered colors, dark blue to purple, to the first thin edge of orange at the horizon, and the stars still visible overhead, and the land below all of it dark and enormous and still. She stood on the porch with the coffee and just looked at it for a while. Then Cobb came around the corner of the barn, saw her, and stopped. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. He seemed unsure what to do with her. She could see him calculating. Was she going to want escorting back inside? Was she waiting for something? Was she the kind of woman who stood on porches at dawn and needed managing? He arrived at no conclusion satisfying enough to act on. "Coffee's good," she said. "Garrick makes it strong," he said. "I noticed." She looked at him. "What needs doing today?" He blinked. "Ma'am?" "On the ranch," she said. "What's the work today?" "Well," he scratched his beard. "North Fence has a section that went down in last week's wind, and we're moving cattle from the south pasture before the heat sets in, and the—" He stopped. "Mrs. Thorne, you don't need to—" "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm asking because I want to know." He looked at her. She waited. "North Fence crew is heading out after breakfast," he said finally. "Then I'll go with them," she said. She finished her coffee and went inside to find better boots. Garrick found out about the fence line at mid-morning when he came back from checking the south pasture, and one of the hands mentioned, with the careful neutrality of a man declining to take sides, that Mrs. Thorne had ridden out with the North Fence crew 3 hours ago. He stood still for a moment. Then he rode north. He found her 3 miles out, on the back of the older gelding she'd apparently helped herself to from the barn, working alongside 2 of the hands to reset a post that had gone over in the wind. She was holding the post upright while the younger hand packed the base back in, and she was doing it competently and without drama, her hat pulled low against the morning sun and her sleeves rolled up to the elbow. She heard him coming. He could see her register the sound of hooves, and she didn't stop what she was doing until the post was packed and tamped, and the young hand stepped back. Then she turned. "How much of this land can you ride in a day?" she said. He pulled up. "What?" "I want to know the boundaries," she said. "The full spread. How long does it take to ride the perimeter?" He sat on his horse and looked at her, standing in the dirt beside a fixed fence post, slightly dusty, entirely unintimidated, and had the unfamiliar experience of not knowing quite what to do next. "I can show you on a map," he said. "I'd rather see it," she said. A pause. "All right," he said. "Get on your horse." She got on her horse. But they rode for most of the afternoon. He showed her the land in the way that someone who genuinely loved something might show it, though he wouldn't have used that word. He pointed out the ridge line that marked the northern property, the dry creek bed that served as the eastern boundary, the water sources, the weak spots in the fence line, the places where cattle drifted if they weren't watched. He explained the seasonal rhythms, where the grass was, where it gave out, where to move animals when. She listened without interrupting, which he seemed to appreciate, but she also watched. She looked at everything, the land, the distances, the particular quality of the light, in different directions at different times. She was filing things away. Learning the geography the way you learn a person's face, by paying attention to the specific rather than the general. At one point, when they stopped to water the horses at a spring, she said, "The southwest section, that fence is older than the rest." 20 years older, he said. "It's going to go this winter." "Probably," he said. "That's a lot of ground to lose cattle through." "We'll repair it in the fall." "Before or after the cold sets in?" He looked at her. "Before." "Good," she said. She was not asking him to justify his decisions. She was asking to understand the plan. The distinction was one he had to work out for himself, and she gave him a moment to do it. "You know land," he said. "I grew up on a farm," she said. "Small one, nothing like this, but I know the basic math of it." "What happened to the farm?" A pause. "The horses drank. My father died in debt," she said, simply. No drama in it, just the plain shape of it. The farm went to cover what he owed. There was nothing left. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was 5 years ago," she said. "I've had time to accept the arithmetic of it." He didn't offer more condolence than that. She appreciated it. There was something irritating about people piling comfort on top of old grief, as if the grief were still the current crisis. "What did you do?" he said. "After. I worked, she said. Sewing, laundry, some teaching. I can read and do arithmetic, which turns out to be useful. I saved. I thought about what kind of future was actually available to a woman in my circumstances, and I was honest with myself about the options. She paused. A few were worse than this. None were better. None were better, he repeated, with something that might have been dryness. I didn't mean it as an insult, she said. I meant it as a calculation. I was quiet for a moment. Then, the letter, I wasn't sure I'd get a response. You got 3 responses, she said, over 2 months. I meant, I wasn't sure I'd get a response at first, when I wrote it. She looked at him. He was looking at the water. Why? She said. I know what I am, he said. I know what kind of life I'm offering. I know the land is hard and the work is harder, and he stopped, looked out at the ridge. And I know what I was before. Even if I've spent 8 years putting that behind me, a man knows what's in his own ledger. She thought about this. You wrote an honest letter, she said. Yes. That's more than most people manage. He turned to look at her. She was watching him with that direct quality that she had, the thing about her eyes that made people revise their first impression without knowing why. We should head back, he said. Sun'll be down in 2 hours. All right, she said. She gathered her horse and they turned south, and the sky above the ridge was going orange and red, and neither of them spoke much on the way back. But it was a different kind of silence than the mornings, something with slightly more ease in it, like a space that had been cleared rather than a space that had been sealed. The trouble with Hollow Creek was that it had a long memory for the things it wanted to remember and a short one for everything else. It remembered that Lena Mercer had arrived on a stagecoach with a letter and a travel case and nothing else. It remembered that she'd been thrown into the dirt by a ranch hand who'd done it because he could. It remembered that Garrick Thorne had defended her, but the way the town told it, that was about Garrick defending his property rather than a woman's dignity. 2 very different things that the town preferred not to distinguish between. Lena went to Hollow Creek for the first time as Garrick's wife on a Friday, 3 weeks after her arrival at the ranch. She needed flour, salt, sewing thread, and boot oil. Practical things. She drove the smaller wagon herself, which was apparently something that the women of Hollow Creek did not typically do, because she received looks for it before she'd even tied the horses to the post. Inside the general store, the shopkeeper, a Mr. Aldous, in his 50s, efficient and businesslike, helped her fill her order with perfectly adequate service and no warmth. Charge it to the Thorne account, he said. I'll pay now, she said, and counted out the money. He blinked. Process this. Made a small note. She was placing the last of the supplies in her basket when 2 women came into the store and stopped when they saw her. She recognized one of them, the shopkeeper's wife from her first day, or someone who'd been standing nearby. She wasn't certain. They whispered to each other in the way that was designed to be heard. The Thorne woman, one said. I heard she's riding out with the ranch hands, the other said, working alongside them like she's hired. What kind of wife does that? Well, what do you expect? She's not really... she was bought. Lena placed her basket on the counter. She turned and looked at the 2 women directly. Both of them went slightly quiet. Direct eye contact from someone you've been discussing is an uncomfortable thing. Good afternoon, Lena said pleasantly. A pause. Good afternoon, one of them managed. I'm Lena Thorne, she said. She tried the name out loud for the first time. It was strange in her mouth, still, like wearing someone else's coat. I've just moved to the area. I expect I'll be in town regularly. I hope we'll have occasion to speak. She smiled, not warmly enough to be read as supplication, not coldly enough to be read as a threat, just evenly. And she picked up her basket and walked out. She could feel their eyes on her back. Good, she thought. Let them look. Let them say whatever they were going to say. People who talked were people whose behavior you could predict, and Lena had always found that predictable enemies were more manageable than silent ones. She loaded the supplies. She untied the horses. She drove herself back to the ranch. The second incident in town was worse. It happened on her 3rd visit, 6 weeks after her arrival, on a morning when she'd come in to pick up a package at the post office, and had made the mistake of stopping at the only establishment in town that sold fresh bread on Tuesdays. The bakery was run by a woman named Mrs. Ford, heavy-set, competent, the kind of woman who gave the impression of having very little time for nonsense, but also, unexpectedly, no particular hostility. Lena bought bread. Mrs. Ford handed it over and said, without preamble, "You're the one who rode out with the fence crew last month." "I was," Lena said. "That's not what people generally do." "I know," Lena said. Mrs. Ford looked at her for a moment with the assessing directness of someone accustomed to her own opinions. "Some folks are saying you're putting on airs," she said, "trying to act like you're more than you are." "What do you think?" Lena said. A pause. "I think a woman on a working ranch who doesn't know the land is a liability," Mrs. Ford said, "but that opinion is in the minority." She took the money. "Comes with the bread on Tuesdays. Anything else?" "Nothing else," Lena said. "Thank you." She walked out of the bakery with the bread and the distinct feeling that she'd made one ally in Hollow Creek, which was approximately one more than she'd expected. But on the street outside, waiting, was the young man who'd thrown her into the dirt on her first day. His name was Del Weaver, she'd learned. Son of a rancher to the north, known for being mean with liquor in him and stupid without it, which left very little window for anything useful. He was not alone. There were two others with him. She didn't slow down. "Mrs. Thorne," Del said, and made it sound like a joke. "That's something. The letter bride with the last name now." She kept walking. "You know what they say about you," he said, following her toward the wagon. "Not running, just the same lazy confidence as before, the kind that lives in men who've never had to recalculate. They say old Garrick keeps you around because he can't do better, that he bought himself a workhorse instead of a wife, and doesn't know the difference." She reached the wagon and put the bread in the back and untied the horses. "You don't want to say anything?" Del said. She turned and looked at him. "Del," she said, and she used his name deliberately, watching his eyes register that she knew it. "I've been called worse things by more interesting people, and I've got a longer memory than you." She said the last part the same way she'd said it the first time, on her knees in the dirt. She wanted him to hear the echo. Something in his face showed that he did. She climbed up onto the wagon and drove away without looking back. But her hands were tight on the reins the whole way out of town, and she didn't let herself shake until she was far enough out that no one could see. The thing about Garrick Thorne was that he was not a simple man, but he organized himself as though he were. He believed in routine and physical work as a philosophy as much as a necessity. He rose at 4:30, worked until dark, ate without ceremony, slept. He had opinions about land, cattle, weather, and the practical mechanics of survival on the frontier, and he expressed those opinions without much decoration. He had other opinions, about other people, about fairness, about what a man owed the world. But those he kept considerably quieter, and you only found them by accident. She found one by accident in her 4th week. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Terrell, 17 years old, the youngest of the crew, had made a serious error of judgment with the cattle count, and had lost 3 head as a result, because he hadn't properly closed the south gate before heading in for the night. 3 head of cattle in a working ranch's economy was not a small thing. Lena had been in the barn when Garrick found out. She hadn't been eavesdropping. She'd been oiling the leather tack because it needed doing. But the barn was not particularly soundproof. She heard Garrick confront Terrell. She expected anger. She'd seen the edge of Garrick's temper in the way he moved when something crossed him. A tightening, a quiet that was different from his usual quiet. But what she heard was different. 3 head, Garrick said. "You know what 3 head cost this ranch?" "Yes, sir," Terrell said miserably. "You're going to tell me you forgot to close the gate." "I did forget. I know you know," Garrick said. "I'm not asking you to tell me what you know. I'm asking you how it happened. Walk me through it." A pause. She could hear Terrell thinking. "I was running late getting back," Terrell said. "Cobb had asked me to check the east fence before dark, and I went long, and by the time I got back to the south gate, I had it in my head that I'd closed it already." "Did you go back to check?" Garrick said. "No." "Why not?" A pause. "I was tired," Terrell said, "and I thought I'd done it." "When you only think you've done something," Garrick said, and his voice had no anger in it, just the flatness of someone delivering a fact they consider important. "You go back and verify. The work doesn't care how tired you are. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "Next time you think you've done something that matters," Garrick said, "you go back and confirm it, even if it costs you 20 minutes and you're dead on your feet." "Yes, sir." "You'll work through Saturday to cover part of what those 3 head cost us," Garrick said. "That's fair?" "It is," Terrell said. "Good." And then, after a pause that Lena hadn't expected, You're a decent hand, Terrell. Don't let one bad evening make you sloppy. It's not the mistake that costs you. It's what you do with the habit afterward. She heard Terrell leave. She sat in the hay with the tack in her hands and didn't move for a moment. Then she kept oiling the leather, because that was the work that was in front of her. She found another thing about him later, not by accident, but by asking. Why did you stop? She said one evening, across the kitchen table, where they'd fallen into the habit of sitting after dinner when neither of them was too tired. The life before the ranch. He was quiet for a long time. A man I respected got killed, he said at last. Not in a fight, not over money, just foolishly. Because the people we ran with were careless with other people's lives, and eventually they got careless with his. He looked at his hands on the table, and I realized I was going to end up the same way. Not dead necessarily, but the same kind of careless, the kind of man who let things happen because it was easier than stopping them. And you didn't want to be that man, she said. I didn't want to be that man, he said. Is it hard? She said. Staying. He looked at her. Staying what? The kind of man you became instead, she said, when the easier way is usually the other one. He held her gaze. Sometimes, he said. She nodded. But you stay, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I stay, he said. The kitchen was quiet. The lamp made a small circle of light. Outside, the frontier dark was complete and total, the way it could only be 12 miles from the nearest electric light. And the wind moved through the grass, and somewhere out in that darkness, the land they'd ridden together was waiting to be worked again in the morning. Then that's who you are, she said. Not the other. He didn't answer, but she thought, watching him, that he might eventually come to believe it. And she stayed at the table a while longer. Winter came early to Thorn Ridge that year. Not a dramatic arrival. No single blizzard that announced itself with ceremony. Just a gradual tightening of the air through October, the mornings arriving colder than the last, the sky losing its summer depth and going flat and gray at the edges. And then one morning, Lena woke to frost on the inside of her windowsill and understood that the season had changed while she was sleeping. She dressed in the dark, added a second layer under her work shirt, put on the heavier boots she'd ordered from Aldis's general store 3 weeks prior, planning ahead the way she'd learned to plan. Not for the current discomfort, but for the one coming. By the time she got to the kitchen, Garrick was already there. This had become the shape of their mornings. She would arrive and find coffee made and him already gone, or she would arrive to find him at the table with his maps, or, increasingly, as the weeks had settled into something like habit, she would arrive to find him still there, finishing a second cup, in no particular hurry to end the quiet. Frost, she said, pouring herself coffee. I know, he said. He had a survey map spread across the table, weighted at the corners with a tin cup, a boot knife, and 2 river stones. Southwest fence needs to come in before the hard freeze. I had it planned for November. It needs to come in now, she said. She sat down across from him and looked at the map. That section's already weak. Cold contracts the wire. You'll lose posts. He looked at her. I've seen it happen, she said. My father's farm had the same problem on the north quarter. He kept saying he'd get to it. First hard freeze took out 60 feet of fence line, and we spent 3 days in January replacing it in conditions that were, she paused, unpleasant. Garrick looked back at the map. His finger moved along the southwest section, tracing the line she was talking about. That's 4 days of work, he said. Maybe 5, if the ground's already hardening. Better than 3 days in January, she said. He looked up. Something passed through his expression. Not disagreement, exactly, but the particular resistance of a man who has been making decisions alone for a long time and finds consultation unfamiliar, even when it's useful. I'll send Cobb and 2 of the hands out tomorrow, he said. I'll go, she said. You don't need... I know the section, she said. I wrote it with you. I know where the weak posts are. Cobb hasn't seen it up close since spring. She looked at him steadily. I'm more useful out there than here. A pause. All right, he said. He went back to the map. She drank her coffee. Outside, the frost held on the window glass, pale and specific in the gray light, and the ranch was just beginning to wake around them. It wasn't a comfortable moment. It wasn't an uncomfortable one either. It was something in between that she was starting to recognize as their particular frequency. 2 people learning how to occupy the same space without either of them having to become smaller. She was getting used to it. She wasn't sure if that was a good sign or just what happened when enough time passed. She thought it was probably both. The southwest fence took 4.5 days, and she was right about the posts. 2 of them were rotted at the base, hidden by the grass that had grown up around them through the summer, solid looking from the top, crumbling when you pulled them. If they'd waited until November, the first real cold snap would have pulled 6 or 8 feet of wire with them, and finding cattle that had wandered through in freezing temperatures was a different kind of problem than finding the fence. Garrick didn't say anything when she pointed them out on the second day. He just looked at the rotted base of the first post, looked at her, and went back to work. That was the version of acknowledgement she was learning to read in him. He didn't offer compliments or validation the way that some people felt compelled to. Didn't say you were right or good catch or any of the small social lubricants that most conversations ran on. He just adjusted and moved forward. She found that she didn't need the words. The adjustment was enough. It was Cobb who did it, actually, at the end of the 4th day when they were packing tools in the failing light. "You've got a good eye, Mrs. Thorne," he said. "Just that. Plain." "Thank you, Cobb," she said. He nodded. That was the whole exchange, but she carried it home. The cold settled in proper the following week. Not catastrophic, just the steady, humorless cold of a frontier winter that intends to stay. The ranch contracted inward, the way working places do in cold weather, all the activity pulling closer to shelter and warmth. The hands spent more time in the barn. Garrick spent more time with the accounts, which were spread across the kitchen table for 2 evenings running, his face doing something complicated while he worked through numbers she wasn't yet privy to. She thought about asking. She decided to wait. He told her at the hotel, debts, a past, things he was working through, and she'd chosen to trust that he'd tell her more when it was time. Pushing wouldn't help. Pushing would just teach him that her patience was conditional, and she'd rather he learned the opposite. She was a patient woman, more patient than she looked, she'd been told, which she took as a compliment even when it hadn't been intended as one. So she let him have the accounts, and she found her own work. The work, as it turned out, was everywhere. She'd learned to sew as a girl, not the decorative kind, not embroidery or fine needlework, but practical sewing, mending, patching, remaking worn things into usable ones. She spent 3 evenings in December repairing the ranch hands' winter gear, coats that had lost buttons or split at the seam, gloves with fingers worn through, a pair of Garrick's work trousers that had developed a tear along the inner thigh that he'd apparently been ignoring since October. She left the trousers on his chair without comment. The next morning they were gone, and at breakfast he looked at his coffee and said, "Thank you for that." "They'd have given out completely by February," she said. "I know," he said. "I kept meaning to get to it." She looked at him. "The way you kept meaning to get to the fence in November?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm beginning to see a pattern," he said. "The pattern," she said, "is that you're good at starting things and stubborn about the follow-through when it's inconvenient." He looked at her. "That's a direct observation," he said. "You told me you didn't want pretense," she said. "I'm being literal." Something in his face that might have been the beginning of a smile if it had developed any further. "I suppose I did," he said. She turned back to her coffee. "The horse tack needs proper attention too," she said. "The bridles, especially. I'll see to it this week." "You don't have to Garrick," she said, and used his name the way she'd learned to use it. Not forcefully, just precisely, the way you'd place a hand on a table to stop something from sliding. "I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because it needs doing, and I'm here. Those are 2 different reasons, and only one of them matters." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. "All right," she said, and they went back to breakfast. The winter wore on the way. Winters do on the frontier. Not quickly, and not with any of the seasonal charm that people from softer climates tended to imagine. It was cold and gray and demanding. The water troughs froze every night and had to be broken up every morning. The cattle required constant attention, because cold animals were stressed animals, and stressed animals made bad decisions near fence lines. The firewood supply required monitoring and occasional restocking, which meant a trip by wagon to the tree stand 4 miles northwest that Garrick had the timber rights to. Lena went on the wood run twice. The second time, she drove the wagon herself, with Terrell, the young hand who'd lost the 3 cattle in September, riding alongside to help with the loading. Terrell was 17, slight, with ears that stuck out a little and the kind of face that would probably be handsome in 3 or 4 years, but was still working out the arrangement of its parts. He was hardworking in the particular way of young men who were trying to prove something after an embarrassment. Not reckless, just determined. She'd noticed him taking extra care with the south gate every single evening since the incident. She liked him. You grew up around here? She said on the drive out. 20 miles north, he said. My family's got a small place. Not like Thorn Ridge, smaller. You live on the ranch now? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thorne gave me a bunk in the hand house. I send money back when I can. He looked at the road. My father's not well. 4 of us younger ones to take care of, so he stopped. Sorry, you didn't ask for all that. I asked, she said. You answered. That's not more than was required. He glanced at her sideways. People say things about you, he said, and then seemed to realize what he'd said and went slightly pink. I mean, in town, I'm not saying I... What do they say? She said, not defensively, just evenly. He was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating whether honesty was going to serve him here. They say you're difficult, he said at last, that you don't act like you're supposed to. Like a purchased bride is supposed to, she said. He went quiet again. What do you think? She said. He thought about it for a while. She gave him the time. I think, he said carefully, that the fence that didn't go down in November was because of you, and that the Terrell who is not currently working for free to make up for lost cattle was because of Mr. Thorne. He paused. I think people here judge on old information. She looked at him. That's well said, she said. My mother taught me to look at outcomes, he said, not at what people assume. She nodded. She sounds smart, Lena said. She is, he said. It's my father who had the bad luck of getting sick, not a stupidity problem. He looked embarrassed. Sorry, that was a strange thing to say. No, it wasn't, she said. Bad luck isn't stupidity. It's just bad luck. Most people confuse them. He seemed relieved. They loaded the wagon in good time and drove back, and Terrell talked for most of the return journey about his family in the north. The younger siblings, the small farm, the particular landscape of the land up there. And Lena listened and asked questions and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was comfortable in the company of this 17-year-old boy in a way she wasn't always comfortable in the company of adults. There was something uncomplicated about his honesty. He said what he thought and wasn't strategic about it. She could respect that. The evening she got back from the wood run, Garrick was at the table with the account books again. She could tell from the line of his shoulders that the numbers weren't cooperating. She poured herself coffee, sat down. He didn't look up. She waited. I owe a debt to the bank in Casper, he said finally. He didn't look up when he said it to the page. Like the admission was easier if it went somewhere neutral first. Took a loan 3 years ago to expand the herd. The expansion was the right move, but the timing was poor. We had 2 bad seasons back to back, lost more cattle than we could replace at the rate I'd planned. The loan's current, but the margin is... He paused. Tight. How tight? She said. He looked up then, seemed to assess whether she was asking as a partner or as someone preparing to panic. Whatever he found in her face satisfied him. If we have a good spring sale, he said, we'll be fine. If we lose more cattle over the winter, or if the spring prices drop again, we'll be in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where the bank gets interested in the land, he said. She looked at the map of the ranch on the wall. The survey map he kept there. The full property marked in ink, the ridge, the creek, the pastures. What can we cut? She said. He blinked. What? In expenses, she said. Between now and spring, what's not essential? He looked at her for a moment. I can cut one of the seasonal hands, he said. Maybe 2. We were running extra crew because of the expansion, and with the herd at current size. Keep Terrell, she said. He raised an eyebrow. He's good, she said, and he needs it. Cut whoever's been there longest and will be easiest placed elsewhere. Martinez, he said, after a moment. He's already got a standing offer from the Hendricks Ranch to the south. Better pay. He's been weighing it. Then let him go comfortably, she said. Give him 2 weeks. That still leaves the supply bill with Aldous, he said. I can manage the household supplies, she said. I'll keep better track. Give me the household budget, and I'll tell you what's actually being spent versus what could be cut. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. You don't have to take that on, he said. I know I don't, she said. But this is my ranch too. She said it simply, not staking a claim so much as stating a fact she'd already arrived at, privately, some weeks before. She'd worked this land. She'd planned for its winter. She'd learned its geography and its weak points and its rhythms. She hadn't been asked to, and she'd done it anyway, because that was how she was built. And at some point in the process, somewhere between the southwest fence and the wood runs and the kitchen table in the mornings, Ide had stopped being his ranch that she was helping with and started being theirs. She didn't make a speech about it. She just said it. He looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said. "Then it's yours too." He pushed the account books toward her side of the table. She pulled them over and started reading. They sat there together for the better part of 2 hours, working through the numbers, him explaining the ranch's economy in the kind of granular detail she suspected he'd never shared with anyone before, her asking questions that made him rethink 2 or 3 assumptions he'd been carrying as settled. At one point she found what appeared to be a double charge on a supply order from August, went back through the ledger, confirmed it, and set it aside to address with Aldous on the next town run. At another point, it was past 10 o'clock by then, the lamp low, the cold pressing against the windows. She looked up from the ledger and found him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You were looking at me like something." "Like what?" he said. "I don't know. That's why I asked." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not what I expected," he said, "when I wrote the letter." "What did you expect?" "I don't know exactly," he said. "Someone more—" He seemed to search for the word. "Arranged. Arranged," she repeated. "Less inclined to tell me when I'm wrong," he said. "More inclined to manage the softness of it." "The softness of telling you when you're wrong?" "Of living in a situation that wasn't chosen out of preference," he said. It came out carefully. She looked at him. "It was chosen out of preference," she said. "My preferences were limited, yes, but I chose you. Out of all the letters I read, and there were others, I chose yours, because you were honest, and because you treated me like someone capable of handling honesty." She held his gaze. "Don't apologize for the situation by assuming I'm managing it badly in private." He was silent. "I'm not managing it badly," she said, quieter. He nodded, just once, but thoroughly. "I know," he said. She went back to the ledger. He went back to the accounts. The lamp burned lower, and neither of them moved to refill it, and eventually the numbers blurred enough that continuing seemed less useful than sleeping, and they said goodnight with the kind of ease that comes from having done something real together. Not the performed ease of two people pretending, but the actual ease of two people who have spent hours on the same problem and come out the other side with something resolved. She lay in her room and looked at the dark ceiling and thought that this was not the life she would have designed for herself, given a blank page and unlimited options. But it was real. And it was hers. And those were worth more than she would have predicted. The double charge from Aldis's supply order turned out to be $22. He admitted it on her next town run. Not gracefully, but he admitted it, and refunded it in cash from the register, and after that his dealings with her were scrupulously accurate, which she supposed was its own kind of respect. It was Del Weaver who made the winter's worst trouble, and he did it in the most predictable way possible. The saloon in Hollow Creek was called the Silver Post, which was a grander name than the establishment deserved. It was a low building with a long bar, a floor that hadn't been leveled properly when it was built, and a clientele that ranged from the genuinely weary to the genuinely dangerous, with a wide middle band of bored young men who were working out their frustrations on whiskey and each other. Del Weaver was in that middle band, and he'd been drinking on a Saturday afternoon in January when Lena came through town on her way back from delivering a supply order to the Hendricks Ranch that Garrick had asked her to drop off. A courtesy call, a good neighbor gesture, between ranches. She was on horseback, alone. That was the variable Del decided to exploit. He caught her at the edge of town where the buildings thinned and the road opened out, away from witnesses, away from the populated center. He'd had enough to drink to be brave and not quite enough to be incompetent, which was the most dangerous combination. There were 2 others with him, the same 2 from before. His orbit seemed to collect a particular type, young men with mean tendencies and no particular conviction of their own, happy to follow where someone else pointed. "Mrs. Thorne," Del said, stepping into the road. She pulled her horse up, looked at him, looked at the road around him, calculating distances and angles with the calm specificity of someone who'd started doing this automatically. "Del," she said. "Out here by yourself," he said. That's not very careful of old Garrick." "Garrick knows exactly where I am," she said. It was true. and when I'm expected back. That's nice, Dell said. Doesn't change where you are right now. He stepped closer. The two men behind him spread slightly. Not dramatically, just the lazy positioning of people who understood vaguely that they were there to fill space. The horse shifted under her. She steadied it. Move out of the road, she said. I just want to talk, he said. I don't, she said. See, that's the thing about you. He tilted his head. You act like you've got standing to say what you want, like you're someone. But everybody in this town knows what you are. You're a letter. You were purchased. Step out of the road, she said. Her voice hadn't risen, hadn't changed tempo. Or what? He said. He was close enough now that the horse could smell the whiskey on him, and it stepped again, ears back. Your husband's 12 miles away. These boys here aren't going to run to him for you. What happened next was the result of 4 months of living on a working ranch, learning to ride properly, learning to handle an animal that was not small and not gentle, learning the particular kind of nerve it took to stay calm when things went wrong fast. She didn't run. She didn't back up. She urged the horse forward, not fast, controlled, deliberate. And 300 pounds of horse moving with intention toward a man on foot tends to clarify the situation very rapidly. Dell scrambled sideways. One of his companions went the other direction entirely. The third stayed put but moved back, which was enough. She came through the gap and kept going. She heard Dell's voice behind her, angry, something about a word she didn't dignify with attention, and she rode at a steady canter until the town was behind her and the road opened into the long, flat stretch toward the ranch. Then she pulled the horse to a walk and let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking, not badly, but noticeably. The kind of tremor that happens after the body has done its part and is waiting for the mind to catch up. She looked at her hands on the reins. Not fear, she told herself. Adrenaline. Different thing. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she held the thought and she held the reins and she rode the rest of the way home in the gray January light, with her jaw set and her back straight, and the clear understanding that Dell Weaver was not going to stop being a problem by himself. She told Garrick that evening. She told him the whole thing, sitting at the kitchen table, without softening the edges or rearranging the sequence of events to make herself look better or worse. Just what had happened, in order. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. He was looking at the table. His jaw was doing the thing she'd learned to read. The particular set of it that meant something was working through him that he was choosing not to let out. How far out of town? He said. 1/4 mile, maybe, she said. At the east edge. 3 of them. 3, she said. You rode through, he said. I rode through, she said. He was quiet again. Garrick, she said. I'm telling you because you should know. Not because I'm asking you to do something about it. He looked up. He put himself in the road, he said. He did, she said, and I handled it. I know you did, he said. I can still be angry about it. She held his gaze. You can, she said, but I need you to hear the part where I handled it, and not just the part where it happened. He worked through that. I hear it, he said. Good, she said. He stood up from the table and went to the door and stood there with his hand on the frame, looking out at the dark. She could see the tension in his shoulders. Not directionless tension, but very directed tension, looking for somewhere to go. I'm going to talk to Weaver Sr., he said. The father. All right, she said. Not because you need me to fix it, he said. Because there needs to be a conversation between men who own property in the same county about what happens to a man's son when that son keeps making poor decisions. All right, she said again. He turned back to look at her. You're not going to ride to Hollow Creek alone again, he said. In winter. Not until... Garrick, she said. I'm not telling you what to do, he said, and there was something strained in it, the effort of a man who genuinely didn't want to be telling her what to do and was doing it anyway. I'm asking, there's a difference. She looked at him. It was a fine distinction, and it would have been easy to reject it, to hear control where he was trying to say something else. But she'd learned, in 4 months, to listen for what was actually being said in the gaps of what this man actually said, and what she heard was not I don't trust you, but something closer to I cannot afford to lose this. She wasn't ready to think too much about what that meant. Take someone with you, he said. Terrell or Cobb? When you're going to town. Through the winter. Through the winter, she said. Not agreement, exactly. A boundary on the concession. Through the winter, he said. All right, she said. He nodded. looked at the dark a moment longer. "You're not frightened," he said. It came out like something he was still working out. "I was frightened," she said. "My hands shook on the reins the whole way back. But frightened and handled are not mutually exclusive." He turned back into the room, stood near the table. "No," he said, "they're not." He poured himself water, stood drinking it. The lamp made his shadow long across the kitchen floor. "Del Weaver is going to be a problem," she said. "The kind that doesn't get solved by his father having a conversation with yours." "I know," he said. "He has a grudge," she said. "The kind that's about his pride, not about anything real. Those are the ones that don't go away on their own." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" He set the glass down. "I'm going to talk to his father first," he said, "and see what kind of man the father is. That tells you something about how far the apple's fallen." "And if the apple's fallen far?" "Then we figure out the next step," he said. "Together." She held that word, together, and didn't say anything. But she heard it, and it meant something to her that it had come from him, this man who had spent 8 years building a life around the specific practice of relying only on himself, saying it plainly, with no apparent awareness that he'd handed her something. Maybe he wasn't aware. Maybe it was just the honest word for the situation, and he'd used it without thinking. That seemed right for him, actually. She said goodnight. She went down the hall to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a moment, and she didn't think about Del Weaver or the account books or the Southwest fence or any of the practical things that her days were made of. She thought about the way the word together had come out of him. Careful man, careful speech, words costing him more than they cost most people, and landed so easily in that cold kitchen like it was simply the accurate description of how things stood. The cracked jar on the windowsill caught the moonlight. The fracture was still there, running through the glass. It hadn't spread. The seal held. She lay back and closed her eyes. Some things hold together, if you're careful with them. Garrick rode to the Weaver property on a Tuesday morning in February, alone, the way he did most things that required a particular kind of nerve, without ceremony, without preparation beyond what was already in him. He was gone 4 hours. Lena did not wait at the window. She was not built for waiting at windows. She worked instead, mended 2 more coats, re-oiled the barn door hinges that had been stiff since December, helped Terrell break up the water troughs, and got colder than she'd planned when the ice cracked wrong and sent a sheet of freezing water across her boots. She came inside and changed her socks and drank hot coffee and did not think about where Garrick was or what was being said in the Weaver household. He came back at midday. She heard the horse come into the yard, heard the barn door, heard his boots on the porch. She was in the kitchen. She poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the table and waited. He came in and sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at it. "Well?" she said. "Chester Weaver is a decent man," Garrick said. "Old stock, hard-working, embarrassed." He drank. "He didn't know about January, or he says he didn't know. I believe him. He had the look of a man hearing something that genuinely surprises him, and Chester Weaver is not skilled enough at performance to fake that." "And Del?" "Del was there," Garrick said. "For part of it." He paused. Chester took a strap to the conversation in front of his son, which, "I didn't ask for that. But it happened." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where a father tells a son exactly what he is," Garrick said, "and doesn't soften it for the occasion." He set down the cup. Del didn't say much. He had the look of someone who wanted to say a great deal and had enough sense left to understand that the room wasn't with him. "Sense enough for the room," Lena said, "but not necessarily enough for after." Garrick met her eyes. "No, not necessarily." She nodded. "So it's not resolved." "It's quieter," he said. "Chester'll keep a hand on it for a while. That's something." He looked at the table. "But you're right that it's not the kind of thing that resolves. Not with someone like Del." "What kind of someone is Del?" she said. Garrick was quiet for a moment. "The kind that needs someone else to be less than him," he said. "Because without that, he doesn't know what he is." He said it without particular judgment, just the flat observation of someone who recognized the type. Those men are always going to find a target. When the target doesn't behave like a target, it makes them worse before it makes them better. If it makes them better at all. "You've known men like that," she said. He looked at her. "I've been men like that," he said. "In a different direction, when I was younger." She held that. He didn't offer it easily. She could tell by the way he said it, the slight pause before. The way he went back to the coffee like the admission was already more than he'd planned to give. What changed? She said. I told you, he said. A man I respected got killed. No, she said. That's what happened. I'm asking what changed in you because of it. He was quiet again. I understood, he said slowly, that I didn't want to be the kind of man you had to be in order to survive the life I was living. That the survival had started to cost more than the living was worth. He looked at his hands, and I thought, if I stayed, I would become something I couldn't come back from. So you came back before that point, she said. I tried to, he said. Whether I made it all the way is a question I'm still working on. She looked at him across the table. For what it's worth, she said, the man I see at this table is a long way from the one you're worried about. He held her gaze for a moment. Thank you, he said. He said it carefully, the way he said most things that cost him. It's not kindness, she said. It's observation. I know, he said. That's why it means something. February ended. March came in cold, and then slowly, grudgingly, began to release its grip on the land the way winter always does on the frontier. Not gracefully, not all at once, but in fits and retreats. Warm days followed by killing frosts. Mud following ice following mud again, everything half-thawed and difficult. The cattle made it through in better shape than Garrick had feared. They lost 6 head over the winter, 2 to illness, 2 to a bad cold snap in late January, 2 to a predator that had been working the south end of the property since December, and that Garrick and Cobb finally tracked down in early March. It was a mountain lion, lean and desperate, that had come down from the higher country ahead of the cold. Garrick shot it and stood over it for a long time without saying anything, and then they rode back to the ranch. You don't like killing things, Lena said that evening. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. No. But you're good at it. Being good at something and liking it are different measures, he said. Yes, she said, they are. She thought of her own hands on the horse's reins in January, the controlled push through Del Weaver and his companions, the cold assessment of distances and angles that had come to her without thinking. She was good at some things she didn't particularly like. That was a knowledge she was still filing away in herself. Spring came properly in April, and with it the work expanded back outward, the contracted winter routines opening up into the full geography of the ranch, the cattle moving to the north pasture, the fence crews back on the outer lines, the general acceleration of everything that needed to be done before the heat set in. Lena learned to shoot in April. She'd known the general idea of it. She was not ignorant of firearms, had handled her father's old rifle once or twice, knew the basic mechanics. But Garrick taught her properly, with the patience of someone who understood that competence was a more useful gift than protection. They went out to the flat behind the barn on Sunday mornings, which were the mornings that tended to have the fewest competing demands. You're pulling left, he said, on the second week. He was standing to her right, watching her line up the shot. Before you squeezed, your shoulder anticipates the kick. I know it does, she said. I can feel it. The way to stop it is to stop thinking about the kick, he said. That's easier to say than do. Everything worth doing is, he said, don't think about what's coming after the shot. Think about the shot, just the shot, nothing after. She lined it up again. She breathed. She tried to put everything past the moment of the trigger behind a wall in her mind and leave only the sight, the distance, the target. She squeezed. The shot went straight. There, he said. She lowered the rifle. That's the principle, she said. That's the principle, he agreed. Does it work with everything, she said. Not just shooting. He thought about it. Most things, he said. Not all. Some things you have to think about what comes after. Which things? He looked out at the flat, the scrub brush, the red rock of the ridge beyond. The things where the decision matters more than the execution, he said. Where the doing is the easy part. Whether to do it, that's where you have to think forward. She looked at the target across the flat, a rusted tin can on a fence post, knocked sideways by the shot. How do you tell the difference? She said. Experience, he said. Mostly, which is not a satisfying answer. No, she said, but it's honest. She picked up the rifle again. They shot until the morning opened into the heat of midday, and then walked back to the barn in comfortable silence, and she thought that this was one of the things she hadn't expected. Not the shooting, but the ease of these mornings that had no agenda beyond the work itself, no performance required from either of them. She'd spent a lot of her life performing, being palatable, being appropriate, making herself fit inside the shape that her circumstances required. Out here, with the flat empty land and the rifle, and this particular man who used words like expensive goods and didn't require anything from her that she hadn't already chosen to give, she didn't have to perform. She wasn't sure when she'd stopped. She wasn't sure it mattered when. The first sign of real trouble came in May, and it didn't announce itself as trouble. It announced itself as a rider. Lena was on the north fence with Terrell when she saw the man on the ridge. He was at distance, half a mile, maybe more, sitting still on a dark horse, watching the ranch below with the particular stillness of someone who was not passing through. She watched him for a moment. "Terrell," she said. "I see him," Terrell said. He'd spotted the rider a few seconds after her and was already watching. "He's been up there a while." "Since when?" "Since before we came out. I noticed when we were saddling up." He paused. "I thought maybe he was just passing." "Passing people don't stop on ridgelines and watch," she said. She looked at the rider for another moment. He was too far away to make out any detail. Just the shape of a man on a horse, motionless against the sky. "I want to ride up there," she said. "Mrs. Thorne, come with me if you want," she said, "but I want to see who that is." She rode for the ridge. The rider saw her coming. She could tell by the way the horse shifted, the small movement of a person registering approach. And he waited. He didn't ride away, which told her something. Running people run. Watching people wait because they want to be seen, or they don't mind being seen, which amounted to the same calculation. She came up the slope and pulled up 20 feet from him. I was older than she'd expected, maybe 50, with a weathered face that had been handsome once and still held the structural memory of it. He had cold eyes, not cruel exactly, but flat in the way of people who'd spent a long time making decisions where feeling things was a liability. He wore a gray duster despite the warmth of the May morning, and his horse was better than his clothing suggested. He looked at her with calm, unhurried interest. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, not a guess. He'd known who she was. "You have me at a disadvantage," she said. "You know my name and I don't know yours." "Vane," he said. "Silas Vane." She held her face very still. The name meant nothing to her directly, but she'd heard it, once, in the only conversation Garrick had been willing to have about the men he'd ridden with before. He'd mentioned no names, but Silas Vane was the kind of name that had a gravity to it, and later that same evening she'd heard Cobb use it under his breath in the barn when he thought no one was close enough to listen. She understood now why the name had that weight. "Mr. Vane," she said, "what can I do for you?" "I'm not here for you," he said. "I'm here for Garrick." He looked past her at the ranch below, the rooftops, the barn, the hands moving between the buildings. "I tried the direct approach 3 years ago. He wasn't interested in talking. I thought I'd give him some time to reconsider." "And if he's still not interested in talking?" she said. He looked back at her, that flat, assessing gaze. "Then we'll have a different kind of conversation," he said. He said it without menace. That was almost worse than if he'd threatened her. He said it the way you'd discuss 2 roads to the same destination, noting that one was longer. "Tell him I was here. Tell him I'd like to meet. He knows where to reach me." "I don't know that he does," she said. "He does," Vane said. He turned the horse. "Mr. Vane," she said. He stopped, looked back. "What is it you want from him?" she said. In plain language. He seemed to consider whether plain language was something he wanted to spend on her. "I want what's owed," he said at last. "What a man owes when he walks away from a shared enterprise without settling his accounts." "A shared enterprise," she said. "We were business partners," he said. "Of a kind." He left. That created a cost. "I've been patient about it. I am a patient man, Mrs. Thorne. But patience has a natural end. And the end is now," she said. "The end is soon," he said. He rode off the ridge and down the far side, and she watched him go until the horse disappeared into the scrub below. Terrell came up beside her. "Who was that?" he said. "A problem," she said. "Go back to the fence. I'll be down shortly." "Mrs. Thorne, please, Terrell," she said. He went. She sat on the ridge for a while longer, looking at the ranch below. The buildings, the land, the 12 miles of difficult country between here and Hollow Creek, the fence lines, the pastures, the water sources. All of it mapped in her now. All of it familiar. All of it something she'd worked into her body through the months of learning. She thought about what Garrick had told her in the hotel, the first evening. I know what I am. I know what kind of life I'm offering. I know what was in my own ledger. She understood now that the ledger had a specific creditor. She rode back to the ranch. She told Garrick that evening. She told him plainly the whole sequence, the rider on the ridge, the name, the conversation, and she watched his face do something controlled and difficult while she spoke. He let her finish. He didn't interrupt. When she stopped, the kitchen was very quiet. How long was he up there? Garrick said. Terrell said since before we went out, she said. That's at least 2 hours. Garrick nodded. Once. The controlled jaw expression, the stillness. He said you'd know where to reach him, she said. I know where to reach him, Garrick said. Are you going to? He was quiet. Garrick, she said, tell me what we're dealing with. He stood up from the table and went to the window. The evening was going down in layers outside, the sky doing its deep orange and red thing in the west, beautiful and indifferent. Silas Vane is the man I rode with, he said. The leader, if you want to call it that. Not a gang in the romantic sense. Just a group of men willing to do things that other men weren't willing to do, for money. He paused. When I left, there was money that hadn't been divided. A payment we'd been promised for a job that came through 6 months after I'd gone. Silas says I'm owed a portion, and that by leaving early I forfeited it, and that my portion should rightfully go to the men who stayed and completed the work. That sounds like a business dispute, she said. It would be, Garrick said, except the portion he's describing is more than he says. When I left, I took nothing. I left my share of what we had at the time because I didn't want to take anything from that life into this one. I left clean. His voice had the particular flatness of someone recounting something they've thought about until the edges wore smooth. But he doesn't see it that way. He sees 8 years of the ranch as profit generated from a foundation he helped build. He wants a portion of what Thorn Ridge is worth. Lena was quiet for a moment. He wants the land, she said. Some of it, Garrick said, or the equivalent in cash, which would amount to the same thing. And if you don't pay? He turned from the window, looked at her. With Silas, he said, the escalation is always the same. He starts with patience. He moves to demonstration, and then he moves to violence, which he's always been comfortable with in a way that most men aren't. Demonstration, she said. What does that look like? Animals, he said. Property. Making you feel the cost of refusing before he makes you pay the larger one. She held this. Who knows about this? She said. Cobb? The hands? Cobb knows some, Garrick said. Enough. The hands don't know anything. She looked at him. We need to tell Cobb everything, she said. I know. And we need to decide what we're doing, she said, before Vane decides for us. I know that too, he said. She stood up, went to the window beside him. The ranch below was settling into its evening, the hands moving to the bunkhouse, the animals quieting. What are the options? She said. Pay, he said. Which I can't. Not what he's asking. The bank loan and the spring margins don't give me that kind of room. Or, she said, go to the law, he said. Except the law in this county is Sheriff Broderick, who is a decent man with limited resources and no particular history of successfully standing between Silas Vane and what Silas Vane wants. Or, she said again. He looked at her sideways. Or we refuse, he said, and we prepare. For what? For what comes after refusal, he said. She looked out at the land. Then we refuse, she said. He turned to look at her fully. Lena, we're not selling pieces of this ranch to a man who has no rightful claim to it, she said, and we're not paying him because he made you afraid enough to pay. Those are the only other options, and neither of them is acceptable. There's risk in refusal, he said. I understand that, she said. Real risk, he said. Not theoretical. He's a violent man, and he has men who will do what he asks. I understand that too, she said. Garrick. She turned to face him. I came here with nothing but a travel case and a letter. Everything I have is what I've built in this place, in these months, with you. And I'm not handing any of it to a man on a ridge who thinks patience is the same thing as rightful ownership. She held his gaze. We refuse, and we prepare. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at the land, with the particular attention of someone who is still discovering what they have. "All right," he said. They told Cobb the next morning. Cobb listened with the still, unreadable expression he wore when he was thinking hard. He'd served in the territorial militia before coming to work at Thorn Ridge. Lena hadn't known that until Garrick mentioned it on the walk to the barn, and the combination of that history and 20 years of frontier ranch work had left him with the quality of a man who processed bad news by immediately converting it into tactical considerations. When Garrick finished, Cobb was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think he'll move before summer?" "I think he'll move when he decides patience is done," Garrick said. "Which could be a week or a month. I don't know his current timetable." "How many men does he typically run with?" "4 or 5, Garrick said. "Depends on the job. He doesn't keep a standing crew. He pulls from people he knows when he needs them." 4 or 5 against a ranch crew, Cobb said. He wasn't making it sound manageable. He was making it sound like a problem that required honesty. "Against a ranch crew that knows it's coming," Garrick said. Cobb looked at him, looked at Lena. "You both certain about this?" he said. "Yes," Garrick said. "Yes," Lena said. Cobb nodded. "Then we do it right," he said. "I'll talk to the hands individually, find out who's willing to stay if things get difficult, and who needs to go before it starts. No point keeping men who aren't prepared for it. They'll be a liability when it matters." "Agreed," Garrick said. "Night watches," Cobb said. "Starting now. The fence lines especially. South end first. If Vane starts with demonstration, he'll start where the cattle are." "I'll ride south fence every morning," Lena said. Both men looked at her. "You'll ride with someone," Cobb said. "Fine," she said, "but I ride. I know that fence line better than anyone except Garrick, and Garrick needs to be across the property." Cobb looked at Garrick. "She knows it," Garrick confirmed. "Fine," Cobb said. "With Terrell." "With Terrell," she agreed. The demonstration started in June. The first was a section of north fence line, cut cleanly, not broken, which was the point. Cut meant deliberate. Broken meant weather or accident. Cut meant, "I was here and I chose to do this, and you can't prove otherwise." They found it on a Monday morning, 8 cattle through the gap, recovered by midday but scattered enough that recovery cost 4 hours of work. No one saw anyone, no tracks worth following. It had rained Sunday night, and what might have been hoof prints were reduced to indistinct shapes in the mud. Garrick looked at the cut wire for a long time. Then he and Cobb repaired it, and the watch on the north fence got tighter. The second demonstration was worse. 3 weeks after the fence, they found 2 cattle dead in the east pasture. Not predator kills, which was the first thing they checked. The markings were wrong, the wounds wrong. Someone had ridden in fast and done it quick and ridden out, and by the time the morning check found them, whatever tracks there'd been had been obliterated by the overnight movement of the herd. Garrick stood in the field looking at the dead animals for a long time. Lena stood beside him. "This is what you said," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "Demonstration," she said. "Yes." She looked at the cattle, at the land around them, open, large, impossible to watch in every direction at once. "He knows we can't see everything," she said. "That's the point," Garrick said. "He wants us to feel it, the helplessness of it." He paused. "He's done this before, with other people. He's patient and methodical, and he'll keep doing it until either we come to him or—" He stopped. "Or what?" she said. "Or he decides to stop being patient," Garrick said. She looked at him. "How much time do we have before that?" she said. "Not much," he said. "Now that he's started, he'll accelerate. The demonstrations are expensive for him too. He's not a wealthy man, and every man he sends out here costs him. He'll want resolution before the summer's out." "Then we need to do something before he does," she said. He looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" he said. She looked at the dead cattle in the morning light, at the ridge in the distance where Silas Vane had sat on his horse and watched with those flat, patient eyes. "I don't know yet," she said, "but sitting here and watching him eat away at what we've built, that's not resolution. That's just a slower way of losing." He didn't argue. He knew she was right, and that was in many ways the more frightening part. That the man who understood Silas Vane better than anyone else on Thorn Ridge was looking at the situation and not seeing a clean path through it. She thought about the rifle, about the Sunday mornings on the flat behind the barn, about just the shot. Nothing after. She thought about what came after the shot. That Garrick had told her, was the kind of thinking where you had to look forward, where the decision mattered more than the execution. She was beginning to understand what decision she might be approaching. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but she could feel its shape in the distance, the way you feel the cold coming before the temperature drops, a knowledge in the body that the mind hasn't finished articulating. Something was coming, and whatever it was, she intended to be the one who chose it rather than the one it happened to. That was the only principle she'd carried with her from her old life, across all the changes and all the distance, the one that had never broken, even when everything else had. She was not going to be something that happened to. She was going to be someone who decided. The third week of July arrived the way trouble tends to, quietly at first, in the texture of ordinary days, in things almost right that weren't quite right. Lena noticed it before she could name it. The hands were tired in a different way than the normal deep tiredness of summer work. The night watches had been running for 6 weeks, rotating through Cobb and the 2 remaining hands, and occasionally Garrick himself, and the accumulated shortage of sleep was wearing on everyone in ways that showed at the edges. Shorter tempers, slower reactions, the particular flatness of men who were maintaining discipline through will rather than ease. She'd taken a watch herself twice, over Garrick's initial objection and Cobb's eventual practical acceptance, because the body count of available people was limited and she was available. She'd sat up in the dark with a rifle across her knees and listened to the ranch breathe around her and watched the fence lines and felt, on both occasions, a kind of cold alertness that she didn't particularly enjoy but recognized as necessary. Nothing had happened on either of her watches. Nothing had happened on any watch since the dead cattle in June. That was the part that bothered her, not the activity. The silence. Silas Vane had demonstrated twice and then gone quiet, and quiet from a patient man was not the same as retreat. She'd thought about this enough to bring it to Cobb, who'd looked at her with the expression of someone who'd arrived at the same conclusion by a different route and wasn't glad to have the company. "He's letting the watches tire us out," Cobb said. "He knows we're watching, and he knows we can't keep it up forever at this intensity. He's waiting for us to get sloppy." "How long before we get sloppy?" she said. Cobb rubbed the back of his neck. "Martinez left in March. That left me, Terrell, and Dunbar on the crew, plus you and Garrick in a pinch. That's 5 people splitting nights, plus full days of ranch work." He paused. "Another month at this rate. Maybe less." She'd told Garrick that evening. He'd listened. He'd agreed. He'd looked at the maps on the kitchen table with the expression of a man measuring a problem against his resources and finding the resources shorter. "I'm going to write to the sheriff in Casper," he said. "Not Broderick. County sheriff's useless on this. The territorial marshal's office." "Will they come?" "Maybe," he said, "with enough detail about Vane's history. He has federal charges outstanding from 7 years ago. I know that because I was there when they were made, and I know they were never resolved." He paused. "I should have gone to them 3 years ago when he first made contact. I thought if I ignored it, it would—" He stopped. "It would go away," she finished, "because that's what you wanted it to do." "Yes," he said. "That was poor judgment." "Write the letter," she said. He wrote it that night. Whether it would bring help in time was a different question, and neither of them said out loud that they weren't sure it would. The attack came on a Thursday night in late July. It came at 2 in the morning, the deepest part of the night, the part when even disciplined watchers are fighting themselves. And it came from 2 directions at once, which was Silas Vane showing his actual capacity for the first time, the patience done, the demonstration phase over. Garrick was on watch on the east side. Cobb was on the south. Terrell and Dunbar were supposed to be sleeping, but Terrell, who had the particular insomnia of young men with active consciences, was sitting up in the bunkhouse when the first shot came in from the east and everything happened at once. The shot hit Garrick. He went down in the yard between the barn and the main house. Not immediately, not in the clean way of stories, but staggering, one hand going to his left side, making it 3 more steps toward the house, before his legs decided they were done and he went to one knee in the dirt. Lena heard the shot from her room. She was up and had the rifle before the echo cleared. She came out of the house into controlled chaos. Muzzle flashes from the east fence line, shouting from Cobb's direction in the south. The cattle in the near pasture sounding their deep panicked alarm. Terrell running from the bunkhouse with his rifle already in hand. She saw Garrick in the yard. She ran. She got to him and dropped to one knee and got her hand to his side and felt the immediate warmth of blood, more of it than she wanted to feel. How bad? She said. Go inside, he said. His voice was strained but present. Get inside, Lena. How bad? She said again, the same tone, not raising it. I don't know, he said, sighed. I think it went through. He grabbed her arm. You have to get inside. They're here for the ranch, for me. I'm aware, she said. Another shot came from the east. She heard it hit the barn wall, too high, someone shooting at movement in the dark rather than at a target. Terrell, she called. I was already there, crouching behind the water trough. Help me get him inside, she said. They got Garrick to the house between them. Terrell taking most of the weight, Lena keeping the rifle up and watching the dark yard, moving backward. It was not graceful. Garrick made sounds she didn't think he meant to make, sounds the body produces involuntarily when it's been damaged and asked to move anyway. And she cataloged those sounds and filed them away because there was nothing she could do about them in the next 30 seconds, and the next 30 seconds required her attention. They got him inside. She got him to the kitchen floor, solid floor, away from windows, the most defensible interior position. She looked at the wound. The bullet had entered the left side below the ribs and based on the exit wound, which was there, which meant through and through, which was better, had not hit anything. It couldn't survive missing. If infection didn't take hold, and if he didn't lose too much blood, and if they got him real medical attention within a reasonable window. 3 large ifs. But it was survivable. You're going to be all right, she said. You don't know that, he said. I know the bullet went through, she said. That's the best case and you've got it. She was already tearing fabric, the kitchen cloth, the cleanest thing available, and packing the wound, which made him go white and clench his jaw. Stay on the floor, stay down. You can't. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was still strong, which she took as a good sign. Lena, don't go out there. She looked at him. Outside, another shot. Cobb's rifle answered from the south. She'd learned the sound of Cobb's rifle over 6 weeks of watches, its particular voice. He was still up, still fighting. I have to, she said. There are too many of them. There are 2 of us out there, she said. Cobb and Terrell. That's not enough. She looked at him. You know that. His grip on her wrist didn't loosen immediately. She looked at him steadily. I know this ranch, she said. I know every foot of fence line. I know where they'll push and where we can hold and where the ground works in our favor. She paused. You taught me that, all of it. You didn't teach me for a situation like this specifically, but everything you showed me was for situations exactly like this. His grip loosened. He didn't say she was right. He looked at her with something that was past argument, past the place where rational objection lived. And she understood that the grip loosening was not permission. It was a man who knew better than to think he could stop her and had arrived at that knowledge just barely in time. Come back, he said. Work on staying alive, she said. She went back out. The yard was dark and loud and difficult, and she had exactly the rifle and 2 boxes of shells she'd brought out of the bedroom, and the knowledge of the property that she'd spent 8 months building into herself like a second skeleton. Terrell was at the barn wall. She got to him low and fast. How many? She said. East side I counted 3 muzzle flashes, he said. He was scared. She could hear it in his voice, the thinness of it, but he was holding. South I don't know. Cobb's still shooting. East fence runs downhill to the left past the water tank, she said. There's a dry creek bed behind it. If they came in from that direction, they came through the creek bed. So? So the creek bed is the only good cover on that side, she said, which means they're all using it, which means they're all in the same place. She looked at him. If we go around the tank and come from the north end of the creek, we'd be behind them, he said. Almost behind them, she said. They'll hear us coming, but we'll be between them and their best exit point. She looked at him. Can you do that? He was 17 years old and frightened and sleep-deprived, and he said, Yes. Stay close, she said. Don't shoot until I do. They went. She moved through the dark, the way she'd learned to move over 8 months of this land, knowing where the ground was solid and where it was loose, knowing where the fence posts were without looking, knowing the particular dip of terrain near the water tank that you had to step carefully through in the dark or risk turning an ankle. She felt Terrell behind her, close, doing his best. They came around the north end of the water tank, and she stopped and listened. She could hear them. 3 men in a dry creek bed make noise, the crunch of loose stone, the scrape of bodies repositioning, the low voices of men who think the darkness makes them private. She fixed the direction, measured the distance. Maybe 40 feet. She thought, just the shot, nothing after. She rose up from behind the tank rim and fired at the rightmost muzzle flash. Terrell fired at the same moment. She'd timed it without planning to, felt him ready beside her and moved when he was ready. The creek bed erupted. Two men scrambled. She could hear it, the sudden frantic movement of people who've discovered they're flanked. And one of them fired back high and wild, which told her he was moving when he fired, which meant he was running. She fired again. The third man in the creek bed stopped firing. She didn't know if she'd hit him or if he'd run. She kept the rifle up. The creek bed was quiet. Stay here, she told Terrell. She moved along the tank wall to the south, toward Cobb's sector, where the shooting was still intermittent, and she could hear Cobb's rifle every 40 seconds or so. Methodical, deliberate, the cadence of a man not panicking. She found Cobb behind the corner post of the south fence, a position she recognized as the one they'd discussed during the planning weeks ago, the best available cover on that side of the property. East side's running, she said, low, coming up beside him. He didn't waste time being surprised she was there. Two on this side, he said. One's been steady, one I haven't heard in a while. Either gone or waiting. Where's the steady one? She said. He pointed. She looked. Nothing visible, but in the direction he indicated there was a low black shape that might have been a boulder, or might have been a man's profile. She waited. She had learned waiting, over the winter, over the mornings on the flat with the rifle, over the weeks of night watches. She was better at it than she used to be. The shape moved. She fired. A sound from that direction, not a death sound, something shorter, sharper, and then scrambling, fast, retreating. Cobb fired once more at the retreating sound, and then it was quiet. The whole yard was quiet. It took a long moment for her to trust it. Then from the bunkhouse direction, Dunbar's voice. Are we done? Is it done? Stay put, Cobb called back. 5 more minutes. They waited 5 minutes. Nothing moved, nothing fired. It was done. Lena lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking, both of them this time, not just one, and badly enough that she had to grip the rifle deliberately to steady them. Her ears were ringing from the shots, and the night felt enormous and strange around her, too quiet after all the noise, the kind of quiet that has weight. You're bleeding, Cobb said. She looked at her left arm. At some point, she couldn't remember when, something had caught her upper arm. Not a bullet, she thought. A fragment, maybe. Something flying. It had bled through her sleeve and she hadn't felt it. It's minor, she said. It's bleeding, he said. Garrick's inside, she said. He took a shot to the side. He's stable, but he needs proper medical attention. Can you send Dunbar to town for the doctor? Cobb looked at her for a moment. Go inside, he said. I'll handle the rest of this. She almost argued. Then she thought about Garrick on the kitchen floor and the 3 large ifs she'd catalogued, and she went inside. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, which was in some way the most surreal part of the whole night. The lamp still burning, the account book still on the table, and Garrick sitting up against the far wall with his hand pressed to his side and his color bad but his eyes open. His eyes found her the moment she came through the door. He took her in. All of her. The rifle, the arm, the general state of someone who'd been in a firefight. You're hurt, he said. Your side, she said. Let me look. She came down beside him. The packing had done its work. The bleeding had slowed. He was pale and clammy in the way of people who've lost enough blood to feel it, but his eyes were tracking. His voice was present. How many were there? He said. East side 3, she said. South side 2, 5 total. She was examining the wound while she talked, doing 2 things at once the way the situation required. Terrell and I flanked the east side, Cobb held the south. And? They ran, she said. Or at least the ones that could. He was quiet for a moment. What happened to your arm? He said. Something caught it, she said. I don't know what, it's minor. Let me see. I'm looking at your side, she said. Lena, in a minute, she said. He was quiet. She finished checking the wound, repacked it more carefully with the strips of clean cloth she'd found in the kitchen drawer and pressed his hand back over it. Hold this, she said. Firm. He held it. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. His color was very bad. He was working at keeping his eyes focused. Cobb's sending Dunbar for the doctor, she said. It'll be 2 hours minimum. You need to stay awake. I know, he said. I mean it, she said. Don't decide you're comfortable. I'm not comfortable, he said. Good. She sat against the wall beside him, close enough that their arms were touching, the rifle across her knees. The kitchen was quiet. The ringing in her ears faded slowly. Outside, she could hear Cobb and Terrell moving around the property, checking, confirming, doing the necessary work of aftermath. Vane wasn't there himself, Garrick said, after a while. No, she said. I didn't see him. He doesn't take field risks, Garrick said. He sends men, watches what happens. He paused. He'll know it didn't go the way he planned. Yes, she said. That changes his calculus, Garrick said. He spent men on this and got nothing. That's expensive. He was speaking carefully, with the precision of someone managing pain while thinking. He has two responses available to him now. He retreats, decides the cost isn't worth it, moves on to easier targets. He stopped. Or, she said, or he comes himself, he said, and he brings more men, and he stops demonstrating. The kitchen was quiet again. Which do you think it'll be? She said. He looked at the far wall. I've known Silas Vane for 15 years, he said, and I've never once seen him retreat. She held the rifle. She thought about Vane on the ridge in May. The patience in his posture, the flat eyes, the way he'd said I want what's owed in the tone of someone stating a natural law. She thought about what Garrick had told her months ago. He moves to violence, which he's always been comfortable with in a way that most men aren't. She thought about the shape she'd felt approaching in June, the one she hadn't been ready to name. She was ready now, sitting in the kitchen with Garrick pale and bleeding beside her, and the rifle in her hands, and the smell of powder still in her clothes. She understood what was coming as clearly as she'd ever understood anything in her life. Vane was going to come. Not his men. Him. And when he came, the question was not going to be whether Thornridge could survive it. The ranch hands could be replaced over time. The cattle could be rebuilt. Even the damage to the property could be repaired, given seasons and work. The question was whether Garrick, in his current state, was going to be standing when Vane arrived. She looked at her husband, this man who had been honest with her before he needed to be, who had pulled her out of the dirt and said she came for me and meant it, who had slowly, without ceremony or declaration, built something with her that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them had needed. And she saw clearly that he was not going to be standing. Not yet. Not for weeks. Which meant that when Silas Vane came back, the person standing between him and this ranch was going to be her. She understood this not as a decision being made, but as a fact already in existence, one she was simply catching up to. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Outside, the night was giving way by small degrees to the first gray light of morning. The land was quiet. The cattle had settled. The birds were starting, somewhere in the scrub beyond the south fence. One more morning at Thorn Ridge. She was going to make sure there were more after it. Garrick's breathing steadied beside her. His color was still bad, but his hand was still firm on the wound pack, following her instruction without being reminded. Lena, he said. I'm here, she said. I'm sorry, he said, that this is what you married. She looked at him. You told me, she said, before the ceremony, in the hotel. You told me exactly what the ledger contained. I thought it was old business, he said. I know what you thought, she said, and I married you knowing it might not stay old. She held his gaze. That was my choice, not yours. He looked at her for a long moment. I should have settled this before you arrived, he said. You should have, she agreed. That was poor judgment, and I've told you so. She paused. It doesn't change where we are. No, he said. It doesn't. Rest, she said. The doctor's coming. He closed his eyes. She sat beside him in the growing light and watched the door and listened to the land outside and thought about canyons, about ridgelines, about the geography of a country she'd spent 8 months learning. She thought about the decisions that mattered more than the execution. She'd made hers. When the time came, she'd be ready. The doctor came from Hollow Creek at dawn, a thin man named Harwell, who smelled of pipe tobacco and spoke very little, which Lena had come to understand was a quality to respect in a medical professional rather than to distrust. He examined Garrick's wound with careful, unhurried hands, asked 3 direct questions, received 3 direct answers, and told Lena that the bullet had missed everything essential and that the primary danger now was fever and infection. Keep it clean, he said. Change the packing every 6 hours. Get fluids into him. If the fever climbs above a certain point, he described the point, and she committed it to memory rather than writing it down because she didn't trust paper in the same way she trusted her own recall. Send for me immediately. How long before he can be on his feet? She said. Harwell looked at Garrick, then back at her. 3 weeks minimum before he's doing anything strenuous. 2 if he's stubborn and lucky. He's both, she said. Then call it somewhere in between, Harwell said. He left. Lena got Garrick into the bedroom, which required help from Cobb and a significant amount of pain that Garrick absorbed with clenched teeth and no comment. She got him horizontal. She changed the packing. She got water into him and sat with him until he slept, which happened faster than she expected. The body, when it finally gets horizontal after a night like that, doesn't ask permission. She went back to the kitchen. Cobb was at the table with coffee. Terrell was outside. Dunbar had come back with Harwell and was in the bunkhouse sleeping, which he'd earned. She poured coffee and sat down. One man from the east side didn't run, Cobb said. He said it without preamble, which she appreciated. Dead, she said. Dead, he said. I put him in the barn for now. I'll need to make a decision about that today. Sheriff Broderick, she said. He needs to know what happened here regardless of his limitations. We document everything, the wire cuts, the cattle, last night. She paused. And the letter Garrick sent to the territorial marshal's office, when did it go out? 3 weeks ago, Cobb said. Then it's there, she said. Whether they act on it in time is a different question. Cobb looked at her over his cup. What are you thinking? He said. She'd been thinking it since before dawn, since the kitchen floor, since Garrick had said, I've never once seen him retreat. It had been sitting in her chest all morning, taking up the space that fear usually occupied, which was either a good sign or a sign that she'd run out of room for fear, which was not the same thing as courage, but sometimes functioned similarly. Vane is going to come back, she said. You know it. I know it. Garrick knows it. Yes, Cobb said. He won't send men this time, she said. He'll come himself. Fewer men, less noise, direct. She looked at her coffee. He knows Garrick is down. He'll know by now. Someone talks, or he has someone in town, or he simply waits for information to travel the way information travels out here. You think he'll move fast, Cobb said. I think he'll move before Garrick is back on his feet, she said, because that's the window. He knows it is. Cobb was quiet. Then we need to be ready, he said. We need to do more than be ready, she said. Being ready means waiting for him to choose the terms. I don't want him to choose the terms. Cobb set down his cup. What are you saying? He said, carefully. I'm saying Vane has a camp, she said. He has a place he operates from, somewhere in the canyon country northeast of here. Garrick mentioned it once, not specifically, but enough. She looked at Cobb steadily. You know where it is. It wasn't a question. She'd worked it out over the last 2 hours. Cobb's territorial militia background, the way he'd positioned himself in the firefight with the precision of someone who'd thought about the property's defensive geography from multiple directions, including approaches from the northeast. Cobb looked at her for a long moment. I have a general sense, he said. Then I need you to be more specific, she said. The silence in the kitchen had weight. Mrs. Thorne, he said, what you're describing. I'm describing taking this situation out of Vane's hands before he uses Garrick's recovery as his timeline, she said. I'm describing not sitting in this house waiting for a man with no rightful claim to anything here to come and try to take it. You'd be riding into his ground, Cobb said. His terms. He picked this fight on our ground for months, she said, and we absorbed it. We absorbed the fence, the cattle, the attack last night. We absorbed it because we were trying to do this the right way. She paused. The right way has Garrick bleeding in the next room. I'm done absorbing. Cobb was quiet for a long time. I can't go with you, he said at last. Someone has to stay with Garrick, and if I go and something happens here, I know, she said. I'm not asking you to come. He looked at her. She looked back. The canyon northeast, he said finally. There's a split in the rock face about 9 miles out. You'll see it when you come over the second ridge, 2 formations that look like they leaned apart from each other. His camp is in the draw behind it, sheltered from the north wind. He's used it for years because the single entry point makes it defensible. Single entry point, she said. Which is also the single exit point, Cobb said. He said it the way a man says something he's not sure he should be saying. If you came in from the south ridge above the draw, you'd have elevation. You'd be looking down into the camp rather than at it. She committed it to memory the way she'd committed Harwell's medical instructions, completely, without writing anything down. Terrell stays here, she said. You and Terrell and Dunbar stay with Garrick. You don't tell him where I've gone until I'm too far out for him to do anything about it. He'll know, Cobb said. He'll suspect, she said. Knowing and having recourse are different things. Cobb looked at the table, looked at his coffee, looked at a point somewhere between those two things where he was clearly working through every version of how this could end. You saved 2 men last night, he said. You and Terrell, at the water tank. I'm not forgetting that. I know you're not, she said. If something goes wrong out there, then you take care of Garrick and this ranch, she said. That's all. He didn't agree, but he didn't argue either, and at this point in their acquaintance, she'd learned that Cobb's silence on a thing was as close to assent as he generally got. She went to check on Garrick. I was sleeping, which was the most useful thing he could do. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at him. The particular stillness of injured sleep, shallow and restless at the edges, but holding. And she thought about what he'd said in the kitchen in the dark. Come back. 2 words. From a man to whom words cost a great deal. She intended to honor them. She changed from her work clothes into the darkest things she owned. Loaded the rifle, fully, carefully, the way he'd taught her to do it without rushing the process. Added the handgun she'd been practicing with since May to her belt, which felt strange and purposeful at the same time. Packed water. Packed enough for a day. She left before 7 in the morning, while the ranch was still managing its aftermath and no one was watching the north gate. The ride to the canyon country took 2.5 hours. The land northeast of Thorn Ridge was different from the ranch's immediate geography. Wilder, less obliging, the kind of terrain that the frontier had kept for itself because it wasn't useful enough for anyone to have fought over it yet. Red rock formations rose in shapes that looked accidental and weren't, shaped by water and wind over time into things that resembled decisions. The scrub was thicker here, the trails faint or non-existent, the shadows deep in the cuts between the rock. She found the split formation on the second ridge exactly where Cobb had described it. She stopped there and studied what she could see. The draw below was in shadow, partially, a natural bowl between the canyon walls with the camp at its center, fire pit, bedrolls, 2 horses picketed at the south end, a structure that was less a building than a deliberate lean-to of cut branches and canvas against the eastern wall. She counted, 1 man near the fire, sitting. 1 man at the horses. 1 man she could see only partially, at the lean-to's edge. 3. She thought, the attack last night had sent 5. 1 dead, some fled. 3 here now. Not all of Vane's potential crew, but the ones who'd returned to camp. She looked for Vane. It took a moment. He was at the far end of the draw, near the north wall, standing with his back partially to her, looking out at nothing visible from her angle, or looking at something inside himself. He stood the way he'd stood on the ridge in May, the stillness of a patient man who had learned to inhabit waiting. 4 total. Her and the rifle against 4 men in a canyon where they knew the ground and she didn't. She sat with that math for a moment. Then she thought about what she actually had. She had elevation. She had the element of not being expected. Vane had sent men to Thorn Ridge, not anticipated being visited. She had the knowledge that his attention was pointed outward, toward the ranch, not inward toward his own camp. And she had something she'd been building since April on Sunday mornings behind the barn, the ability to put a shot where she intended it without flinching at what came after. She wasn't going to shoot all 4 men. She didn't need to. She needed to change the terms. She settled into position on the south ridge, prone, rifle braced, the camp laid out below her at approximately 200 yards, the elevation giving her a clear line on the fire pit and most of the draw. She breathed. She let the scope of her attention narrow to what was directly in front of her. She fired 1 shot into the dirt at the center of the camp, 3 feet from the man sitting at the fire. The effect was immediate and total. The sitting man went sideways off his log. The man at the horses scrambled. The man at the lean-to disappeared behind cover. Below, in the draw, the controlled chaos of people who'd thought they were safe, suddenly understanding they were not. And Vane turned. He turned toward the south ridge, toward her, with the quick, assessing scan of a man who'd been in enough situations to locate a shooter's position by sound and angle in seconds. She saw his face in that moment, even at 200 yards, because he tilted it up toward her with the unhurried recognition of someone acknowledging a fact. He was not afraid. That she'd expected. She stood up. Not because standing was tactically wise, because she wanted him to see her. Not a sniper on a ridge, a person, visible, deliberate. The camp below had gone very still. "Silas Vane," she called. Her voice carried down into the draw with the particular acoustic quality of canyon walls. Amplified, directed, strange to hear coming back. Nothing moved below. "I have the high ground, and I can hold this ridge longer than your water supply lasts," she called. "That's one option." She paused. "Or you come up, you and me, and we end this conversation." A long silence. Then Vane's voice came up from the draw, measured, unhurried, entirely unsurprised. "You're the wife," he said. "Come up and find out what that means," she said. Another silence. She watched him below. He made a gesture to the men around him, something deliberate, something that had authority in it. And the men stayed where they were, which told her he still commanded, and that he'd told them to stay put. He came up the south trail alone. She kept the rifle on him the entire way. He climbed with his hands visible, not raised in surrender. That wasn't what this was. Just visible. A man choosing to demonstrate something for his own reasons. He stopped 10 feet from her on the ridge, and they looked at each other in the full morning light for the first time, not across a distance. I was older than she'd thought from the ridge in May. Closer to 60 than 50. The weathered face had more wear in it than the cold eyes had suggested. He was tired in a way that had been accumulating for a long time. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People keep saying that to me," she said. The rifle was leveled at his chest. Her hands were steady. "I've stopped being surprised by it." He looked at the rifle, then at her face. "You came here to kill me," he said. "I came here to finish this," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, something adjacent to it. "Then what are you offering?" he said. "I'm not offering anything," she said. "I'm telling you the situation as it stands." She kept her voice even. "You sent 5 men to Thorn Ridge last night. One of them is dead. The others are wherever they went. You spent those men and you have nothing to show for it except a rancher with a hole in his side who is going to recover, and a property that is still standing." Vane said nothing. "The Territorial Marshal's office has a letter," she said. "Detailed. With specific information about federal charges that were never resolved. Charges from 7 years ago that Garrick has first-hand knowledge of. That letter was written 3 weeks ago. Someone is reading it or has already read it." Something moved behind his eyes. "That letter exists whether you burn this ranch down or not," she said. "Whether Garrick lives or doesn't. Whether I ride home today or not. It exists. That's the situation." He was quiet for a moment. "You're saying the leverage is gone," he said. "I'm saying the leverage was never what you thought it was," she said. "You thought you were dealing with a man who had something to protect and no way to fight back. You thought 8 years of building something peaceful meant 8 years of becoming someone who couldn't stand up." She looked at him steadily. "You were wrong about that. And you were wrong about what he'd built here and who he'd built it with." Vane looked at her for a long time. There was something in his face that she didn't expect. Not the flat patience of the man on the ridge, but something underneath it, something that the morning light was finding that the distance had hidden. A tiredness that wasn't physical. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been a certain kind of person for so long that the maintenance of it has become the most demanding work of his life. She didn't feel sorry for him. She was clear-eyed enough to know that sympathy for a man like Silas Vane was a tool he'd been using on people for decades, getting them to hesitate at the moment that mattered. She felt nothing for him specifically, but she recognized the exhaustion. She'd seen it in herself, in the years before the letter, before the ranch. The cost of surviving in a life that wasn't built to fit you. "Walk away from Thorn Ridge," she said. "Whatever claim you think you have, walk away from it. Go somewhere the marshal's office isn't looking for the name Silas Vane." She paused. "I'm not asking you to become a different person. I'm telling you the cost of not walking away and letting you make the arithmetic." The canyon was very quiet. A hawk somewhere above them, riding the thermal. "You'd let me walk away," he said. "I'd watch you walk away," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at the rifle, looked at her, looked out at the canyon country beyond the ridge, the enormous, indifferent landscape that had been here before all of them and would be here after. "Garrick always had a talent for finding capable people," he said at last. "He found me," she said. "I'm not sure talent had much to do with it." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, not quite, but the ghost of recognition that something had been said that was honest. He turned. He walked back down the south trail. She watched him go, rifle still up, until he reached the camp below and said something to the men there, brief, direct, and within 20 minutes the horses were saddled and the camp was being broken down and the draw was emptying. She stayed on the ridge until the last rider disappeared through the canyon's north passage. Then she sat down in the dirt of the ridge and put the rifle across her knees and stayed there for a while. Her hands were not shaking. She wasn't sure what that meant. She'd expected them to shake. They'd shaken after every high-stakes thing she'd done in the last 8 months, the body's honest accounting of what the mind had put it through. But they were still, and the stillness felt less like calm and more like the particular quiet of someone who has arrived somewhere they'd been traveling toward for a long time without knowing the destination. She thought about what she'd told Vane, the arithmetic of it, the decision to offer an exit, not because she was merciful. She was not sure she was particularly merciful, but because she'd thought forward, past the execution, and seen that dead men left alive problems and walking men left closed ones. Whether he'd actually go, whether the territorial marshal would find him before he found another way to make trouble for someone, those were questions she couldn't answer. She could only answer the question in front of her. She rode back to Thorn Ridge. Garrick was awake when she got back. Terrell had given him water and changed his packing and reported that the fever was there but manageable, and he was sitting up against the headboard in the bedroom with the look of a man who had been awake long enough to do the math on where she'd gone. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at her for a long moment. "The camp northeast," he said. "Yes," she said. "Cobb told you." "Cobb was helpful," she said. He breathed carefully. She could see him managing the pain with each breath, controlling it with the same flatness he applied to most difficult things. "And?" he said. "He's gone," she said. "I can't promise for how long or how far or whether the marshal's office catches up to him, but he's gone from here." Garrick looked at her. "You went alone," he said. "You were unavailable," she said. "Lena." He said her same the way he sometimes did, not as a reprimand, not quite, but with a weight that meant he needed her to understand he was speaking from somewhere real. "That was, what you did was necessary," she said. "Reckless," he said. "Both," she said. "They're not mutually exclusive." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "Are you hurt?" he said. "My arm's fine," she said. Harwell looked at it. "That's not what I asked." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I'm not hurt." He reached out and took her hand, the one that wasn't bandaged, with the deliberate, effortful movement of someone for whom reaching is currently a project. She let him take it. "I'm going to say something," he said. "All right," she said. "I wrote a letter to a woman I didn't know," he said, "because I needed help. I was honest in it because I didn't have the patience for anything else." He stopped, gathered himself. "I didn't know, I had no idea." He stopped again. "You didn't know what you were getting," she said. "I didn't know what I was getting," he agreed. He looked at her hand in his. "I thought I was asking for competence. I thought that was the practical thing, the honest transaction, the most I could reasonably hope for." He paused. "I don't have the right language for what I actually got." She looked at him. "You got a woman who makes her own choices," she said quietly. "That's all." "That's not all," he said. The bedroom was quiet. Outside she could hear the ranch, the animals, the hands, the ordinary machinery of a working place continuing its work, regardless of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The land outside was the same land it had been yesterday. The ridge, the fences, the creek bed, the south pasture, all of it still standing. "Rest," she said. "You're going to keep telling me to rest," he said. "Until you're actually better," she said. "And after?" She looked at him. "After," she said, "we'll go back to arguing about fence lines and supply budgets, and whether your stubbornness about follow-through is a character flaw or a feature." Something came into his face, not a smile, not quite, but the warm precursor to one, the expression she'd been learning to read for 8 months, the thing that happened in his eyes before the rest of his face committed to anything. "I'd like that," he said. "So would I," she said. She stayed until he slept again. Then she went back out to the ranch because there was work to be done. There always was. And the work didn't wait for anyone's recovery or anyone's reckoning with what had happened or hadn't happened. The weeks that followed were not easy and not dramatic. They were the ordinary, difficult work of aftermath, repairing the fence damage from the attack, managing the remaining cattle through the heat of August, watching Garrick's fever peak and peak again before finally, grudgingly, settling in the third week. Sheriff Broderick came out on the second day and made his official report with the thorough mediocrity she'd expected, but the documentation was what mattered. 3 weeks after that, a letter arrived from the Territorial Marshal's office acknowledging receipt of Garrick's prior letter and requesting a formal statement, which Garrick gave in writing from the bedroom, hand still not entirely steady, but present. There was no further word from Silas Vane. Whether he was gone or simply quiet was a question that sat in the background of everything for a while. She'd wake sometimes in the night and lie still, listening, running the ranch's nighttime sounds through her internal inventory, checking them against what she knew of the property. She never heard anything that alarmed her. Eventually, the checking became less frequent and then occasional, and then something she did only when the wind came from the northeast and carried the smell of open canyon country through her window. Garrick was on his feet in 2 weeks. Not doing anything strenuous, she enforced that with the particular firmness of someone who'd watched Harwell's instructions work and had no intention of undoing them. But on his feet, moving around the house, sitting at the kitchen table with the account books, which was apparently his version of rest. The spring sale covered the bank margin, he said one morning in September, looking at the ledger with something that wasn't quite relief but was in that direction. If the fall numbers hold, we'll be clear of the loan by January. I know, she said. He looked up. You've been checking these. Every week, she said. Since you were in bed. He looked at her, then back at the ledger, then at her again with the expression of a man who's consistently surprised by the same person and hasn't yet figured out why he keeps being surprised. You could have told me, he said. You were busy recovering, she said. I wasn't incapacitated, he said. You had a fever of 103 for 4 days, she said. You were incapacitated. He looked at the ledger. The numbers are right, he said. I know they're right, she said. He almost smiled. She poured him coffee and sat down across from him, and they went through the fall figures together, the same way they'd gone through the winter figures in December, the same way they'd gone through everything that this ranch required, side by side, with honesty and occasional friction, and the practical intimacy of two people who had stopped pretending they were doing this separately. The transformation, if you could call it that, and she wasn't sure you could, because transformation suggested a before and after that was too clean for what had actually happened, was slower and stranger than anything she could have put in a letter before she arrived. It was Terrell who said it plainest, and he said it by accident. I was leaving in October, heading back north to his family's property to help for the winter because his father's health had stabilized enough to need managing rather than just surviving, which was its own kind of progress. He came to the porch to say goodbye, hat in his hands, the same slightly too big ears, and the same earnest face that had been on her south fence line at 2 a.m, choosing to stay. Mrs. Thorne, he said. Then he stopped and looked slightly embarrassed and said, I don't know how to say what I want to say. Try, she said. He thought about it. When I came here, he said, I'd made a mistake and I thought that was the kind of thing that defined you. One bad night, and then that's who you were. Mr. Thorne told me it wasn't. You told me, he paused. You didn't tell me anything exactly, but you treated me like someone who was still figuring out what he was. That's different from being told. She looked at him. You're going to be fine, Terrell, she said. I know, he said. That's the thing. I know it now. He put his hat back on. I didn't before. He rode north. She stood on the porch and watched him go until the road bent, and he was gone. And then she stood there a moment longer with the October air coming off the ridge, and the land spread out in all its difficult, exacting, specific beauty. The beauty that wasn't soft, that didn't ask to be appreciated, that existed in complete indifference to whether anyone was looking, and she felt something settle in her chest that had been unsteady for as long as she could remember. Not happiness exactly. Not peace, which she'd always suspected was a word people used for numbness, something more specific than either. The knowledge that she was in the right place. Not because it was easy, or because it had been given to her, or because anyone had decided she deserved it. Because she had come here with nothing and built something with her own hands, in partnership with an imperfect man who was doing his best, on a piece of land that didn't care about her but that she'd learned anyway, out of stubbornness and will and the refusal to be less than what she was. She had arrived as something bought. She She had become something else entirely. Not because Hollow Creek changed its mind, though eventually it did, in the gradual, unannounced way of communities that find their judgments quietly contradicted by evidence until holding the original judgment becomes more work than revising it. Not because anyone decided she'd earned her place, but because she'd stopped waiting for permission and gone about the business of being exactly who she was, and eventually the space around her had simply adjusted. Garrett came to the porch. He stood beside her, looking at the same land. "Terrell's gone?" he said. "Gone," she said. He nodded. The evening was coming down slowly in layers, that particular October light that the frontier did unlike anywhere else, going amber and deep, and then a specific shade of blue at the edges that had no name she'd ever found. "Next spring," he said. "What about it?" she said. "I want to rebuild the barn," he said, "properly. The current structure's sound, but it was never built right to begin with, done wrong from the foundation up." He paused. "We'll need to plan for it over winter." She looked at the barn, looked at the land, looked at the ridge where Silas Vane had once sat on his patient horse and believed he understood what this place was worth and who it belonged to. "All right," she said. "We'll plan for it." He didn't say anything else. Neither did she. They stood together in the evening on the porch of the ranch they'd fought for and held, this man who had been honest enough to write a letter without promises, and this woman who had been brave enough to answer it, and the land spread out before them in the October light, still hard, still demanding, still utterly indifferent to their presence, and entirely, completely theirs. Not by purchase, not by inheritance or luck or the goodwill of anyone who might have granted it, by the specific, irreplaceable work of being here, by the choice to stay.